After multiple relationships ending in failure, she was looking for the right man to spend her life with.
She's trying to find people that will give her the love that she so greatly desires.
Eventually, she met a man that was just as gorgeous as she was.
She thought there's still hope for me, and I'm gonna seize this moment.
But a violent encounter turns her fairy tale romance into a horror story.
Her body was found in a ditch.
There are numerous stab wounds.
Whoever did this wanted to make sure that she suffered.
The search for a suspect leads detectives in multiple directions.
She was involved with a lot of different romantic interests.
Did arguments ever get physical?
Yeah, but that happens sometimes.
They couldn't have a civil conversation. It was very volatile.
I be telling, be careful who you're dealing with.
He is an individual that sort of has put himself in a savior position.
But would her savior eventually become her downfall?
There's a thin line between love and hate.
She's cursing at me. You ain't enjoying this, you got that.
Over time, you start to need God.
It's like having the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder.
I believe that she was possessed by some demon.
April 19, 2015. It's a warm Sunday morning in Delray Beach, a quaint coastal town along Florida's Atlantic shore.
Delray Beach is actually a much different vibe than some of your more common places in South Florida. Delray Beach is a much slower pace.
You see people fishing, you see the boats in the canals. That's kind of what people are about, just the natural beauty, the relaxation, the water.
But around 9 a.m. this morning, a local resident is traveling along a remote stretch of road when he spots something unusual.
He noticed something that looked suspicious in a ditch. And as he got closer, he did realize that it was a young lady.
He sees her laying in the grass, unresponsive, and, he's not sure what's wrong. He contacts 911.
First responders race to the location.
Protocol when someone's unresponsive is to get to the scene as soon as possible, because there's a possibility that person still could be alive.
They had no idea if this woman was having a medical issue or what was going on.
When Palm Beach County deputies arrive on the scene, they quickly realize they're too late to help the young woman.
The police get there, and it becomes immediately apparent that obviously she is deceased.
Her body was cold to the touch, so police knew that she had been dead for some time.
At that point, you realize there's no saving this person. Now your job is to preserve the scene.
And as deputies begin to secure the area, they notice something lying near the woman's body.
There was a wallet on the ground next to the body, and inside of that wallet, police found a ID card.
They quickly identified who she was.
Her name was Vanessa Williams.
28-year-old single mother Vanessa Williams had a smile that could light up a room.
She was this beautiful young lady.
She was very social and enjoyed spending time with her friends.
Ambitious and caring to her core, Vanessa had always dreamed of becoming a therapist. But a relationship from her teenage years with a handsome classmate named Nate Tyler had taken her on a different path.
They were high school sweethearts who were very much in love.
Vanessa was so certain that they would go the distance that she even got Nate's name tattooed on her neck. But when she got pregnant, it caused a lot of friction between the two of them.
The stress of teenage parenthood was too much for their relationship to bear, and the couple parted ways soon after the birth of their son.
On her own, as a single parent, she resolved to give her son the best life she could manage. But she kind of had to put her dreams of becoming a therapist on hold.
She was a wonderful mom.
Vanessa managed to finish school while juggling motherhood. But instead of going to college, she jumped into a relationship with a new partner, a man named Stuart Bird.
After graduating from high school, she pretty immediately fell in love with another man from town. They moved in together and he started helping her with her son.
Well, hey there. How was work?
Oh, busy.
Stuart seemed like someone who would take care of her. He had a lot of love for his family, and that was something that Vanessa really appreciated about him.
They talked about getting married and having kids together.
But it was another union that wasn't meant to last.
Their relationship eventually became a little bit toxic.
They split up after 3 years together.
By her mid-20s, Vanessa once again found herself struggling as a single mom.
She went on with her life, trying to pick up the pieces, but she never gave up on love.
She's trying to find different people that will give her the love she so greatly desires. And she's meeting disappointment after disappointment with the types of men that she's involved with.
Finally, in 2011, Vanessa met a man who seemed different from the rest.
Excuse me, miss?
Yeah.
I think you dropped this.
Oh, thank you.
John Chapman was a handsome military veteran, young, fit, knew how to present himself.
They were two very good-looking young people who immediately were attracted to one another.
I don't mean to be too forward, but do you think I can get your phone number?
Sure. Yeah.
As they got to know each other over the coming weeks, John and Vanessa realized they were both looking for the same things in life.
John wanted a big family. He wanted kids. They realized maybe we could build this life together.
So I've never really been with somebody who's felt like a life partner. I've always ended up alone.
Those days are over. I promise.
He was Prince Charming for her. So she and John Chapman fell in love. They started dating.
Vanessa felt like she'd finally found a relationship that would last.
Things were going really well for Vanessa this time around.
With John's help at home, she was able to focus a little bit more on herself. She was working as a medical assistant during the day and taking classes at night so that she could work towards her dreams of becoming a therapist.
But now, instead of seeing her dreams come true, Vanessa Williams has been found dead in a secluded area of Palm Beach County.
Police quickly went into trying to find out what had happened to this beautiful young lady.
They weren't sure if this was some sort of accident or if she was out walking when maybe she suffered some type of medical emergency.
When detectives arrive on the scene, they move in for a closer look at Vanessa's body.
When the police turn over the body, there are numerous stab wounds on her face, on her neck, on her back.
Vanessa was stabbed over 23 times. Whoever did this wanted to make sure that she suffered bad.
After a series of failed relationships, 28-year-old Vanessa Williams finally found a man to stand by her side.
You have John as this military man, and he looks refined, and he's showing himself in a way that, hey, I'm strong and I can protect you. And this is the kind of strength that she's looking for.
The happy couple was looking forward to a bright future together. But now, Vanessa has been found dead on the side of a remote road in Palm Beach County.
It's the beginning of the investigation. They don't have all the information, but from what they've seen so far, this appears to be gruesome, violent.
They were able to determine that Vanessa had been stabbed 23 times.
The question now is, why?
They find money, they find jewelry. Her chain is still on her.
The fact those property pieces that were still there with her indicated not a robbery.
They believe that this is a personal attack. This was someone who had malice and anger, and they took it out on Vanessa Williams.
However, due to a lack of blood pooling, investigators suspect that the violent stabbing didn't happen here.
Law enforcement concludes that she must have been killed somewhere else and brought to this location.
It almost looked like there was an intent to try and hide her location, maybe a hasteful attempt at best.
There are other things there that indicate that they left in a hurry. They see an indentation from where a tire was. They find a flip-flop.
It looked like when Vanessa's body was dragged out of whatever vehicle it was in, all this other debris got dragged out with her.
One item in particular stands out to the investigators.
They find a floor mat from a vehicle that's soaked in blood, and they really want to know whose blood is this? Does this belong to the victim?
It's also potential evidence for DNA from the assailant. Most stabbings or cuttings, the person who is the attacker will typically injure themselves.
Detectives spot another crucial piece of evidence left behind by Vanessa's killer.
They find a wooden-handled knife that looks like it could be the murder weapon.
After the evidence is bagged and sent out for testing, Vanessa's body is transported to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy.
Judging by the degree of lividity in Vanessa's body, the medical examiner believes that she had been dead for about 24 hours.
Lividity is the accumulation of the blood in the lower extremities of the body.
A blood test reveals another surprising new piece of information. That at the time of her death, Vanessa had a street drug known as Flocka in her system.
Flocka came in, I believe, around 2015, 2014 in the Florida area here. There was a lot of reports of crazy behavior, zombie-like behavior, aggressiveness, extreme strength.
Flocka took bath salts and it was manipulated, and it gave you a much more intense high and hallucinations, and anybody could pretty much get their hands on it.
Immediately, law enforcement are thinking that maybe this was some drug deal gone wrong, maybe this was a drug user who had crossed someone.
Armed with this new information, detectives begin trying to learn more about who their victim was.
One of the things that they observed that the medical examiner told them about was that there is a tattoo on the back of Vanessa's neck, and the name of that tattoo was Nate.
Vanessa's social media appears to confirm that she had a man in her life around the time she died. But his name isn't Nate. It's John Chapman.
One of the first places police look is to the boyfriend. He is a former military guy, someone that police can identify with.
When police spoke with John, he was devastated to find out what had happened to his girlfriend. He said that she was a wonderful mom, a great person.
John strikes the detectives as sad, but not especially surprised.
I was afraid something like this might happen.
He said she had some habits that she had fallen into, involving drugs and alcohol.
John tells the police that Vanessa's drug use had been getting worse lately. A lot worse.
It started out, I just had a long day at work, and I just need a little something to take the edge off. But over time, you start to need the high.
Vanessa had her struggles. And with her having children, with her having the responsibility of being a mother, of being a partner, trying to co-parent, there are certain things that contributed to her drug use.
Vanessa, seriously? This is getting way out of hand.
John Chapman told them that Vanessa had been out of control and in one of those drug and alcohol-fueled incidents, she left.
How about you stop telling me how to live my life?
He said she had taken off without telling him where she was going.
He tried to call her to figure out where she was. He couldn't get in contact with her.
I thought that I was gonna be able to see her again, but...
Do you know anyone that might want to hurt her? Drug dealer, ex-boyfriend?
I know she had issues with her ex.
John actually shared with police that Vanessa's relationship with Stewart was extremely toxic. They couldn't have a civil conversation. It was very volatile.
They had some mutual friends and would run into each other from time to time. And Stewart would always try to weasel his way back in.
She couldn't fully get away from this guy.
And according to John Chapman, Stewart Bird had a history of domestic violence against Vanessa Williams. He had attacked her in the past, and of course, John felt like he would do it again.
I didn't trust her. And I know she didn't either.
He told the police that that's the place where they should start looking.
John was adamant that Stewart Bird had something to do with this.
Vanessa Williams' boyfriend, John Chapman, has just told Palm Beach County Police that she was battling drug addiction in the months before she was murdered.
Vanessa was a mom, a student, a healthcare worker, and unfortunately, she had turned to substances to deal with all of the stressors in her life.
Before you know it, we're self-medicating. And so where someone may say, you know, that could never be me, before you know it, it is you.
According to John, Vanessa had been behaving increasingly erratically in the weeks before she was killed. And shortly before her body was discovered, she'd complained about running into her ex, Stewart Bird.
After getting this information, police immediately went into the background of Stewart, and they discovered that he had an extensive record. He had burglary, domestic strangulation, grand theft, and child abuse.
At that moment, Stewart Bird became suspect number one.
But when detectives bring Stewart in for questioning, he seems shocked.
Stewart denied having any responsibility for killing Vanessa.
What? No. Listen, y'all have the wrong guy.
However, he does acknowledge there were moments in their 3-year relationship he's not proud of.
He admitted that things got pretty heated between them.
Did arguments ever get physical between the two of you?
Yeah. But that happens sometimes.
With that relationship, there was domestic violence.
It shows his ability, his possibility of creating a violent scenario with Vanessa.
They want to know, where were you on the night of April the 18th?
According to Stewart, he has an alibi for the night Vanessa was killed.
Stewart Bird tells them, well, I was working all night. He gives them the name of his employer.
You can call my supervisor right now, he'll tell you.
Police were able to contact his employer, who confirmed that Stewart was definitely at work on the night that Vanessa was murdered. So now they're back to square one.
Eager to drum up new leads, police shift their focus to the people who knew Vanessa best.
Vanessa's parents lived about an hour away in Miami, and while they were still grieving the loss of their daughter, they were ready to talk to detectives.
Vanessa's parents were devastated. It is extremely heartbreaking as a parent to know that your child was killed.
Vanessa's parents tell detectives that their daughter had a long history of troubled relationships.
I always tell them, men, it wants only your money and something else.
Right.
And I be telling them, be careful who you're dealing with.
So in cases like this, either you have a lot of suspects or you have nobody. And this case had a lot of suspects. She was involved with a lot of different romantic interests.
Vanessa's parents also confirm what John Chapman said in his interview about Vanessa's rampant drug use.
She was using drugs.
You know what kind of drugs? Cocaine?
I don't know. That I don't know.
She was dealing with a lot. It's like having the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder. I have my responsibilities, but I don't know how to cope.
Vanessa's parents say the last time they saw their daughter was about a week ago when she stopped by for a surprise visit.
What time was that?
Around 5 something. 5:30.
What kind of car did she have?
She didn't have a car. She said it's a friend car. She was driving a truck.
What kind of truck?
White, I think white, she's a Ford.
The truck was alleged to have belonged to Corey Summers, a friend of hers.
But other than Corey's name, Vanessa's parents know nothing about him.
I met him once.
Okay.
After Vanessa left in Corey's truck, her parents never heard from her again.
I started texting her, but I never had no response from her.
Did you call her after that? Did you ever, after that point, talk to her again?
Never.
Based on this information, investigators want to speak with Corey Summers as soon as possible.
The question now was, did Corey have a reason to want Vanessa dead?
After speaking with her parents, Florida detectives have learned that Vanessa Williams was last seen driving her friend Corey Summers' truck around the time she was killed.
Did you ever, after that point, talk to her again?
Never.
When detectives reach out to Corey Summers, they're surprised to hear he's been waiting for a call from law enforcement.
Corey thought the police were calling about his truck, the one that he had allegedly let Vanessa borrow.
Corey explains that he's a long-haul trucker who'd been out on the road until a few days earlier.
When he came back from one of his long-haul trips on April 17th, his truck was missing. There was a police report made.
When detectives explain they're calling under graver circumstances, Corey seems grief-stricken.
Here's the deal. We're working on homicide investigation, but it's okay.
He agrees to come into the police station to give an official statement.
Corey confirmed that he and Vanessa were friends, and he said he allowed her to stay at his place after she and her boyfriend John got into a huge argument about her drug use.
She asked me to stay. I told her okay because I don't ever hardly ever be home.
He says that Vanessa has stayed with me from time to time. I've allowed her to crash here when she's needed to. I'll see her, and then I'll go out on the road for several days, and then I'll come back.
Corey insists the relationship between them was entirely platonic.
One of the things I gotta ask you, were you intimate at all, you and her?
No.
Never?
No.
Okay.
Corey, he is an individual that sort of has put himself in a savior position. He tries to help people. He's trying to help Vanessa, trying to give her a place to stay.
They had an arrangement where Corey would allow Vanessa to use his pickup truck while he was out on the road.
She doesn't have the transportation to get and back and forth from work.
Okay.
So I told her to use my truck. Just be careful with it.
But the last time he got home, Corey says Vanessa and his truck were gone.
Vanessa was missing, and his apartment was in shambles, as if there had been a struggle or fight going on in there.
I know she had company, but I don't know who she had there.
He didn't know what happened. He tried to reach out to her. He couldn't get in contact with her.
In speaking with Corey, he seemed to be very forthcoming, very cooperative, very willing to help the police, but they are not sure if they are able to trust him.
Again, I got to ask you this because if it comes out later on, I want to make sure we're clear. Did you guys have any intimate relationship between you two?
No, a little bit with her.
When was that?
That was months ago.
But before you told me that you didn't.
We're not really sure if there's a relationship there. Maybe, maybe not. So you have to look at that. Was he jealous?
But Corey insists he wasn't even in the same state at the time when police believe Vanessa was killed.
I was in Georgia.
You were in Jersey?
Georgia.
At the end of the interview, Corey agrees to turn his cell phone over to police.
We need your phone just to make sure everything checks out.
Sure, okay.
And while it's sent out for analysis, detectives track down the last name on their list. The father of Vanessa's oldest son, Nate Tyler.
Although he and Vanessa broke up years ago, they were still on good terms for the sake of their son.
They were extremely close, although they were only platonic.
And according to Nate, the last time he saw Vanessa, she confided in him that she was struggling.
You know, she had been telling me things weren't going well with John, her boyfriend. And she'd been staying with some other guy, Corey, I think.
Yeah, we've already talked to Corey.
Nate tells the investigators that on another occasion, he'd witnessed the tension between Vanessa and John firsthand.
There was an incident that Nate shared with police where they were all hanging out and something transpired that really ticked John off to the extent that he started throwing furniture, became vulgar, got very violent.
It was shocking, you know? It happened out of nowhere.
Did Vanessa say these type of outbursts happen often?
Yeah, she did.
She told him that John was abusive, that John would go fly off the handle for different reasons.
She confided in Nate about all of the threatenings, the stalkings, the verbal abuse, the beatings that she was getting.
Based on what they're hearing from Nate, detectives have to wonder, has John been misleading them all along?
At this point, getting out there, finding John, and getting face-to-face with John is very important.
But when detectives try to bring John Chapman in for another round of questioning, they quickly hit a roadblock.
They'd say, we gotta pick this guy up and talk to him again. There's only one problem. He's gone. He's on the run.
In the spring of 2015, Palm Beach County investigators have had no shortage of suspects in the murder of 28-year-old Vanessa Williams. So far, they've spoken with her ex, Stuart Bird, close friend, Corey Summers, and even her high school sweetheart, Nate Tyler. But unfortunately, all three men seem to have airtight alibis.
Thanks to phone records, police were able to confirm that their three prior suspects had not been in the area at the time Vanessa was murdered.
Stewart was confirmed to be at work, and Corey in Georgia. And Nate was out of town visiting some friends.
However, in speaking with Nate Tyler, investigators have unearthed a new suspect, a man they're already familiar with, Vanessa's most recent boyfriend, John Chapman.
According to Nate, Vanessa had confided in him about her very tumultuous relationship with John.
John had been abusing her, both physically and verbally.
She was trying to get away from John. She was trying to cut ties with him.
He conducted himself in a way that was reckless, dangerous, and possibly deadly.
Detectives want to speak with John Chapman again as soon as possible, but they'll have to find him first.
He's gone. He's on the run.
He wasn't at home or at work. He wasn't answering his phone.
Detectives think John may be traveling in Corey Summers' missing pickup truck. And before long, they receive a promising tip about the stolen vehicle's location.
There was actually an APB put out on Corey's truck, and they found it in front of the home of a Lana Palmer.
Lana Palmer is alleged to have been romantically involved with John Chapman. They had an on-again, off-again relationship between the two of them.
By the time police respond, the truck is gone.
They go in there, no John Chapman, but they do find Lana Palmer.
Can I help you? When they questioned Lana about the truck in front of her home, she admitted that John had come by.
The last time that she saw John Chapman, on April the 18th, he came there driving a white truck, clothes covered in blood.
John? Oh my God, what did you do? He was very bloody. He looked like he had been through just too much. And showing up to her home, asking for refuge, if you will.
She asked him, "What happened, John?"
He said he'd been fighting with someone. I could tell he was lying, though.
Baby, I had to defend myself.
He told her that he had gotten into a fight with one of Vanessa's ex-boyfriends. She didn't believe the story, but since he was acting so weird, she just allowed him to come inside, take a shower, and clean up.
Okay, just go rinse all that off, please.
But after John washed up, Lana witnessed more strange behavior from him.
She saw him take a SIM card out of a phone and rip it in half.
She realized that there was something awry here, and the story that he was given just didn't line up.
I don't know what you're up to, but I want you out. Told him to get out, and he did.
Do you have any idea where you may have went?
No, not a clue.
She said he took his things and he left.
Lana insists she hasn't seen or heard from John since that night. And with no other leads on their suspect's location, investigators are back at square one.
They start to intensify their efforts to find him because the clock is ticking.
As an investigator, you need to get to John as soon as possible.
Police reached out to law enforcement agencies in the surrounding areas to be on the lookout for John. They also enlisted the aid of the U.S. Marshals to help look for him.
Soon, their efforts pay off.
Eventually, they got a tip that the truck had been seen in Miami.
The tip led them to an apartment complex where they found the truck parked outside.
And inside the truck, police make an alarming discovery.
There's blood everywhere.
Based on the amount of blood, police believe that this may be where Vanessa was killed.
They found a green purse that they thought must have belonged to Vanessa, as well as a flip-flop that matched the one found at the body's dump site.
Now more than ever, investigators know they need to track down John Chapman.
Investigators go door to door looking for John Chapman. They don't find him anywhere. But what they do discover is near to that apartment complex is a homeless shelter.
Inside the homeless shelter, police finally locate John.
As he's getting dressed, they take him into custody. The police have their man.
Back in Palm Beach, detectives are eager to sit down with their #1 suspect.
They immediately started peppering him with questions about what had happened to Vanessa, and to their surprise, he didn't hold back.
Vanessa was, she wasn't herself at all. I had to kill her.
John finally confessed to the murder.
But that's not all he says.
He tells them that it was in self-defense. He said she attacked him with a knife.
I believe that she was possessed by some demon.
Palm Beach County detectives have finally arrested John Chapman for the murder of his 28-year-old girlfriend, Vanessa Williams.
They take him into custody and they start to question him.
Now in the interrogation room, John has just made a stunning confession.
She wasn't herself at all. I had to kill her.
He tells them that it was in self-defense.
I would hate to say that I'm a spiritual person. Okay. But I believe that she was possessed by some demon.
John tells the investigators it all started when he went to see Vanessa at Corey Summers' house on the night of April 18th.
Let's start with what led to this.
Drugs.
Drugs?
He showed up at Corey's place to discuss their relationship and found her out of her mind on drugs.
When I got there, I realized that there was a lot of meth in the carpet.
Vanessa, what the hell are you doing?
He found Vanessa Williams searching the carpet for Flocka flakes.
He says now that he realized how deep in addiction she is, he realizes that he no longer wants to be with Vanessa.
John, can you help me?
He says it disgusted him that Vanessa Williams' drug use was so out of control.
John tells detectives he was ready to leave soon after arriving, but he was stranded.
He'd gotten dropped off at Corey's house, so he needed a ride back home.
I just wanted that ride back to Cape. And I'm like, hey, let's have fun. Let's go ahead and let's head back to Cape. Let's party.
What did you say that with drugs, everything?
Yeah.
John, with his narcissistic personality, realized that Vanessa was battling an addiction, and he was using that to control her.
On the drive to Cape Coral, the couple stopped to get some fast food. But as the sun set and they finished their meal, they got into a tense argument in the restaurant parking lot.
John was upset with Vanessa about her drug use, and Vanessa was upset with John in regards to the way he had been treating her in the relationship.
She's cursing at me, telling me, you ain't doing this, you gonna have that.
Eventually, John says he had enough.
I really just wanted her to feel what I felt. And I'm not gonna, I don't know how else to say it. I just really, I pulled her hair, and it was just gonna be like a tussle. Right. But what I didn't notice that she had in trouble was a little small knife.
He said she tried to attack him.
He had to wrestle the knife away from her.
When she went for that, I hit her right on top of the head. And I was like, don't you dare do that. And then, honestly, I snapped.
He became completely overwhelmed with rage.
It was quick and it was insane.
You know how many times you snapped? More than once.
The problem with that story is as soon as he got the knife away from her, there was no threat anymore. You don't go back and plunge it 20 other more times in her chest after you take control of the knife.
And instead of getting help, he dumped her body on the side of a remote road where he thought that no one would be able to tie the crime back to him.
John blames his military experience for the extreme violence of his attack.
John is claiming he went into defense mode as though he was still in the military.
My training kicks in. Okay. All the emotions locked into robotic.
My army training kicked in. It's not an excuse to kill someone. Besides that, John admitted he started the physical altercation. So in reality, Vanessa was the one defending herself when she grabbed that knife.
John Chapman, at the end of their investigation, was booked and charged for murder.
At trial in January of 2018, the jury agrees with investigators. John's murder of Vanessa can't be chalked up to self-defense.
In the end, his self-defense was not bought by the jury. They found him guilty of second-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to 48 years in prison.
John was very lucky that he was not sentenced to death and that he wound up being convicted with second-degree murder. That was because in the state of Florida, if it's a crime of passion, you can get second-degree murder.
Vanessa Williams will never get the chance to see what her future might have been, all because of the rage of John Chapman.
Vanessa was trying to turn her life around and have a better future for herself and her children.
Vanessa may not have been the perfect person, but she was really doing her best and trying to get back to a good place.
John Chapman was deceiving to many, and unfortunately, he deceived Vanessa Williams into thinking he was a good and decent person, someone she could build a family with, someone she should have a relationship with. And unfortunately, it cost her life.
The man who terrorized California for more than a decade did not look like a monster. That was the first thing investigators would say later, long after the headlines exploded across television screens, long after entire neighborhoods realized evil had been living quietly among them the whole time. He looked ordinary, forgettable, the kind of man people passed every day without noticing twice. He mowed his lawn. He argued with neighbors. He stood in supermarket checkout lines holding bags of groceries while exhausted parents dragged screaming children through fluorescent aisles nearby. He raised daughters. He attended family gatherings. He lived inside the safe, comfortable illusion of suburban America, while police departments across California spent decades hunting a phantom they could never catch. And somewhere buried beneath that ordinary life was one of the most violent predators in American criminal history, a man investigators believe broke into more than 100 homes, assaulted over 50 women, and murdered at least 13 people before disappearing into silence as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. The nightmare began quietly, too quietly. June 18, 1976. Rancho Cordova, California. A warm summer night, hanging heavy over rows of peaceful suburban homes where people slept with windows cracked open to let the air drift inside. There were no alarms screaming into the darkness, no barking dogs warning of danger, no shattered windows, just silence. Then suddenly, sometime after midnight, a masked intruder appeared inside a young couple's bedroom holding a flashlight and a handgun. The beam cut violently through the darkness. The husband barely had time to react before the stranger ordered both victims face down onto the bed. His voice was low, controlled, calm enough to make the entire situation feel even more terrifying. The attacker tied the husband's hands and stacked ceramic dishes carefully on his back, whispering that if he heard them rattle, he would kill them both instantly. Then, while the husband lay frozen in helpless terror, the intruder assaulted the woman repeatedly inside her own home. The attack lasted nearly 2 hours. When he finally vanished into the darkness, investigators arrived to find something deeply unsettling at the crime scene. This was not impulsive violence, not drunken rage, not random burglary interrupted unexpectedly. The intruder had prepared carefully. He knew the neighborhood. He understood the layout of the home. He moved with chilling confidence. Detectives realized immediately they were dealing with someone methodical, organized, intelligent, a predator who treated fear like an art form. Then it happened again. Another woman, another suburban home, another masked figure entering silently during the night. Victims described hearing strange noises outside days before attacks occurred. Footsteps near windows, gates left open, missing objects mysteriously reappearing in unusual places. The intruder stalked neighborhoods beforehand, studying routines with obsessive patience. He watched homes for hours from shadows and drainage canals. Sometimes he entered houses before assaults simply to unlock windows or move objects around as psychological warfare. Survivors later described the feeling as worse than the attack itself. The realization that it had already been inside their homes while they slept peacefully, completely unaware death might already be standing in the hallway watching them breathe. California newspapers exploded with panic. Headlines screamed about a mysterious East Area rapist stalking suburban communities across Sacramento County. Television stations interrupted evening broadcasts with updates whenever another attack occurred. Police sketches flooded newspapers, though none looked exactly alike. Some witnesses described the attacker as thin and athletic. Others believed he looked heavy-set. Some thought he sounded young. Others swore his voice belonged to an older man. The confusion only deepened public fear because it made him impossible to identify. Every stranger became suspicious. Every unfamiliar car parked near a neighborhood suddenly triggered paranoia. Men purchased guns in record numbers. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts, floodlights, and window locks almost overnight. Still, the attacks continued. The intruder moved through neighborhoods like smoke slipping beneath a locked door. He climbed fences, cut through backyards, disappeared into canals and bike paths before police could establish perimeters. Officers flooded crime scenes within minutes sometimes, but the attacker always escaped. 9 units lost ascent repeatedly near creeks or drainage systems, convincing investigators he knew the geography intimately. Some detectives quietly began considering a horrifying possibility. The predator may have lived within the same communities he targeted. The psychological manipulation became even more disturbing as attacks escalated. Victims reported the intruder sometimes cried during assaults. Soft sobbing, nervous muttering, moments where he sounded almost emotionally shattered. Then suddenly the vulnerability disappeared, replaced again by cold, terrifying control. Investigators debated endlessly whether these breakdowns were genuine or another performance designed to confuse victims and manipulate investigators. Either possibility felt deeply unsettling. Then came the phone calls. Women who survived attacks began receiving calls late at night. Some answered to hear nothing but breathing. Others heard whispering. A few recognized the same voice from their assaults. One victim later described waking in the middle of the night to a call where the voice quietly whispered, "I'm going to kill you." Then the line went dead. Fear infected entire communities. Women stopped staying home alone. Couples slept with baseball bats beside beds. Parents formed armed neighborhood patrols, driving slowly through suburban streets with radios and flashlights. Newspapers published maps tracking attack locations across Northern California, like a spreading disease outbreak. The attacks no longer felt isolated. They felt inevitable, like some unstoppable force moving methodically from neighborhood to neighborhood, choosing victims at random. Except investigators slowly realized the victims were not random at all. Many homes backed against open spaces, trails, canals, or schoolyards offering easy escape routes. The attacker often selected neighborhoods where homes looked nearly identical, making witness descriptions less useful. Some victims were targeted after attending community events where they may have unknowingly crossed paths with the predator earlier. Detectives began piecing together a chilling portrait of someone who blended perfectly into ordinary suburban life. And then the violence changed. At first, the crime centered around sexual assaults and burglaries. Then suddenly, in 1979, the attacks spread south into different counties. Santa Barbara, Ventura, Irvine, new jurisdictions, new victims. But now people were dying. The first murder scene shocked even veteran homicide detectives. A young couple discovered bludgeoned to death inside their home. No forced entry. The killer had entered during the night exactly like before. The bindings resembled earlier assaults connected to the East Area Rapist investigations in Northern California. Yet because law enforcement databases were primitive during the late 70s, many departments failed to recognize the similarities immediately. Different counties investigated separately. Communication moved slowly between jurisdictions. Critical information disappeared inside filing cabinets and evidence lockers. The killer used that weakness perfectly. He crossed county lines and vanished again. Bodies continued appearing across California during the following years. Couples attacked in bed. Victims bound with shoelaces. Homes ransacked in bizarre ways. Personal items stolen without obvious value. Detectives noticed the same behavioral patterns emerging repeatedly. The same calm control, the same methodical movements, the same terrifying confidence inside occupied homes. Gradually, investigators realized the horrifying truth. The East Area Rapist had evolved into a serial killer. The media eventually gave him another name, the original Night Stalker. But even that title failed to capture the scale of fear spreading through California. Communities became obsessed with locking doors before sunset. Real estate values dropped in affected neighborhoods. Women carried whistles and mace everywhere. Men installed floodlights and reinforced bedroom windows. Parents checked on sleeping children repeatedly throughout the night because nobody felt safe anymore. The killer transformed ordinary suburban homes into psychological prisons where families lived under constant fear that darkness itself might suddenly enter through the window. And through all of it, police had nothing solid. No suspect, no fingerprint match, no reliable witness identification, no arrest. The killer seemed untouchable. Investigators worked endless hours chasing leads that collapsed into dead ends. Thousands of men were interviewed. Composite sketches changed repeatedly. One detective later admitted the task force felt like they were chasing a ghost wearing different faces. Every time police believed they understood the offender, another crime shattered their theories completely. Then, just as suddenly as the murders began, they stopped. Silence. No more attacks. No more bodies. No more late-night calls. The predator simply disappeared. Years passed, then decades. The case slowly drifted into cold case obscurity, buried beneath newer murders and fresher headlines. Some detectives retired carrying boxes filled with evidence they refused to throw away because deep down they believed the killer was still alive somewhere. Survivors tried rebuilding shattered lives while wondering every day whether the man who destroyed them walked freely among ordinary people. Some victims developed severe anxiety. Others moved repeatedly, unable to sleep peacefully in the same house for long. Entire families collapsed beneath trauma that never fully healed. And somewhere in California, the killer kept living, working jobs, paying bills, attending birthday parties, growing older, invisible. By the late 1990s, advances in forensic science began transforming criminal investigations across America. DNA testing suddenly offered hope in cases once considered impossible to solve. Evidence collected decades earlier could now reveal genetic profiles hidden inside microscopic traces of biological material. Detectives reopened old evidence boxes from forgotten crimes, searching desperately for anything preserved well enough to test. What they found stunned them. The DNA connected multiple unsolved attacks across California into one horrifying chain. The East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Visalia Ransacker, one offender, one predator, one man responsible for years of terror stretching across the entire state. Investigators finally united the cases beneath a single name that will become infamous across America, the Golden State Killer. But even with DNA, the killer remained unidentified because his profile existed nowhere in law enforcement databases. For years, the genetic evidence sat like a locked door investigators could not open, until technology changed again. For years, the Golden State Killer existed only as fragments, a flashlight beam cutting through darkness, a trembling voice whispering threats inside suburban bedrooms, footsteps outside windows at 2 a.m. Survivors remembered pieces of him, but never enough to fully see the monster standing in front of them. Detectives built endless profiles trying to predict what kind of man could commit such calculated brutality while disappearing so completely afterward. Some believed he was military because of the discipline in his movements. Others suspected law enforcement because he seemed to understand police response times too well. One investigator described the killer as someone who hunted people the way predators stalk prey in the wild. And the most terrifying part was that he appeared to enjoy the fear more than the violence itself. The attacks revealed an offender obsessed with psychological domination. He did not simply enter homes. He invaded lives. Victims described hearing noises outside for nights before assaults occurred. Gates creaking open. Dogs barking suddenly into darkness. Flashlight beams drifting across fences. Some women reported finding missing jewelry moved into strange places around the house. Others noticed windows unlocked after being certain they had secured them earlier. The killer was rehearsing, watching reactions, testing vulnerability. He wanted victims to feel unsafe long before he struck. Then came the phone calls. One survivor answered late at night to hear breathing on the other end. Slow, deliberate, heavy enough to recognize instantly. Another victim heard the voice whisper obscenities before suddenly screaming in rage. Others received calls years after assaults had ended, proving the attacker still remembered them long after police attention faded. Detectives realized the crimes extended far beyond physical violence. The killer wanted permanent psychological control. He wanted victims trapped inside fear forever. Entire neighborhoods transformed under the pressure. Streetlights stayed on all night. Husbands took turns patrolling suburban blocks with rifles and flashlights. Parents warned children never to walk home alone. Women stopped opening doors after dark, even for neighbors they recognized. California suburbs, once advertised as symbols of safety, suddenly felt like hunting grounds. Newspapers printed terrifying headlines almost weekly. Night stalker strikes again. Mass predator attacks couple. Police hunt serial rapists. The public consumed every detail obsessively because nobody knew where he would appear next. And still, police failed to stop him. The killer adapted constantly. When neighborhoods increased patrols, he shifted locations. When police established surveillance, he attacked elsewhere. When investigators released composite sketches, witnesses reported seeing dozens of innocent men resembling the drawings. Tips flooded dispatch centers faster than detectives could process them. Teachers, mechanics, students, veterans, salesmen. Every suspicious man became a possible suspect for terrified communities desperate for answers. Meanwhile, the offender appeared almost supernaturally calm during attacks. Victims described him moving through homes confidently in complete darkness, as though he had memorized layouts beforehand. He often knew where bedrooms were located before entering. He understood escape routes instinctively. Some investigators believe he spent hours prowling neighborhoods before attacks, crouched behind fences or hidden inside parks watching families through windows. One detective later admitted the offender displayed a level of patience that bordered on predatory obsession. The crimes escalated in frequency during the late 1970s. Some attacks occurred only days apart. Police task forces expanded rapidly. Helicopters searched neighborhoods from above, while officers flooded streets below. Detectives worked 18-hour shifts, studying maps covered in pins marking attack locations. Behavioral analysts attempted to identify patterns in victim selection, but the killer remained unpredictable enough to evade every strategy. He attacked young women, married couples, different socioeconomic groups, different neighborhoods. No consistent profile emerged except one terrifying truth. Nobody was truly safe. Then investigators uncovered another disturbing detail. The offender frequently stole insignificant items from victims' homes. Photographs, coins, personal trinkets, cheap jewelry, objects with little monetary value. It suggested the crimes were deeply personal to him in ways detectives still did not understand. Some investigators believed he kept trophies to relive attacks later. Others suspected the stolen items represented psychological ownership over victims long after assaults ended. Whatever the reason, the behavior reinforced one horrifying conclusion. This was not simple criminal behavior. This was compulsion, a growing darkness spiraling further out of control. By 1978, California law enforcement faced mounting public outrage. Citizens demanded answers. Politicians pressured departments aggressively. Newspapers questioned whether police incompetence allowed the attacks to continue. Behind closed doors, investigators struggled with exhaustion and frustration bordering on desperation. Some detectives became consumed entirely by the case, sacrificing marriages and family lives chasing a predator who always stayed one step ahead. Then everything became worse. On February 2, 1978, emergency responders arrived at a home in Goleta, California, after neighbors discovered signs of violence inside. What they found stunned investigators. 2 victims bludgeoned to death in their bedroom. The brutality differed from previous assaults, but certain details felt hauntingly familiar. The bindings, the nighttime entry, the methodical control over the scene. More murders followed. Couples attacked while sleeping peacefully in their own homes. Victims beaten with overwhelming violence. No witnesses. No clear suspect. No forced entry in some cases. The original Night Stalker investigation exploded across Southern California, but communication between jurisdictions remained disastrously fragmented during that era. Detectives in Northern California investigating the East Area rapists did not immediately realize they were hunting the same offender responsible for murders hundreds of miles away. Valuable time vanished while departments worked separately on pieces of the same nightmare. The killer exploited that confusion perfectly. He crossed counties effortlessly, transforming into different monsters depending on geography. Rapist in Sacramento, burglar in Visalia, murderer in Southern California. Different names, different investigators, different task forces. Yet beneath every crime scene lurked identical psychological fingerprints, stealth control, sadistic patience, and a terrifying understanding of fear. The body count rose. So did public panic. One newspaper columnist described California as a state under siege from an invisible predator. Families began installing metal bars over windows. Gun shops reported record sales. Alarm companies could not keep up with demand. Some women slept with knives beneath pillows. Others refused to stay alone at night under any circumstance. The psychological impact spread far beyond direct victims. Entire communities became trapped inside collective paranoia. Yet through all the fear, the killer remained invisible. Witnesses occasionally reported suspicious men lingering near neighborhoods before attacks. Some saw prowlers running through yards late at night. Others described vehicles parked strangely near canals or schools. But every lead dissolved before police could identify anyone conclusively. Detectives interviewed thousands of people over the years. Nothing stuck. Then suddenly, almost impossibly, the murder stopped. 1981. Silence. No more break-ins. No more phone calls. No more bodies. The predator disappeared without explanation. Investigators considered several possibilities. Maybe he died. Maybe he went to prison under another identity. Maybe increasing age or changing life circumstances forced him to stop. But one theory haunted detectives more than any other. What if he simply learned how to blend in completely? The case slowly cooled over time. Detectives retired. Evidence boxes disappeared into storage. Younger officers inherited fragmented reports from exhausted predecessors who spent years chasing ghosts through California suburbs. Public attention faded gradually as newer crimes dominated headlines. But survivors never escaped the shadow entirely. Many developed severe post-traumatic stress. Some marriages collapsed under emotional strain. Victims relocated repeatedly, searching for safety they never truly regained. One survivor admitted decades later that she still checked closets and windows every night before sleeping. Another described hearing noises outside her house and instantly reliving the attack even 30 years later. The killer stole more than physical security. He permanently altered how victims understood the world around them. And while those survivors struggled to heal, the man responsible continued living freely somewhere in America, possibly married, possibly working ordinary jobs, possibly sitting beside unsuspecting neighbors during backyard barbecues, while nobody realized they were speaking casually with one of the most dangerous criminals in modern history. Then forensic science changed everything. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, DNA technology advanced dramatically. Cold case investigators reopened evidence collected decades earlier from rape kits and murder scenes. Laboratories developed more sophisticated methods capable of extracting genetic material from tiny degraded samples once considered useless. Detectives across California revisited old files hoping science might finally succeed where traditional policing had failed. The breakthrough came gradually. DNA profiles connected the East Area rapist attacks in Northern California to the original Night Stalker murders in Southern California with undeniable certainty. Investigators realized they had spent decades hunting one offender under multiple names. The revelation shocked law enforcement. The scale of violence attributed to a single predator suddenly became horrifyingly clear. The media introduced a new title unifying the crimes forever: the Golden State Killer. The name spread instantly across television broadcasts, newspapers, documentaries, and true crime books. Public fascination reignited. Survivors began speaking publicly again. Retired detectives returned to consult on investigations they once believed would never be solved. But despite the DNA evidence, one massive problem remained. The genetic profile matched nobody in criminal databases. The killer had either never been arrested for a qualifying offense or had somehow avoided entering the system entirely. Years passed again. Still no suspect. Still no arrest. The evidence proved the killer existed, but not who he was. Then a revolutionary investigative strategy emerged from an entirely different world. Consumer genealogy websites. Ordinary people mailed saliva samples to private companies hoping to discover family ancestry, distant relatives, or ethnic origins. Millions uploaded genetic information voluntarily into public databases without imagining detectives might someday use that data to hunt murderers. Cold case investigators saw an opportunity. Instead of searching for the killer directly, they searched for relatives. And somewhere hidden inside thousands of DNA profiles, investigators found the first crack in the monster's invisibility. The breakthrough did not come from a fingerprint, not from a confession, not from a surviving witness, suddenly remembering the missing detail investigators had spent 40 years chasing. It came from ordinary people curious about their ancestry. Millions of Americans had mailed DNA samples to genealogy companies hoping to discover where their families came from, never imagining those same databases would someday help detectives hunt one of the most terrifying predators in modern criminal history. The Golden State Killer had survived every traditional investigation. He escaped patrol officers, detectives, surveillance teams, behavioral analysts, and decades of media attention. But technology was evolving faster than the man who once believed he was untouchable. By 2017, cold case investigators were desperate enough to try something radical. Instead of looking for the killer directly, they searched for people genetically related to him. The strategy sounded almost impossible at first. Detectives uploaded crime scene DNA into a public genealogy database called GeneMatch, hoping to locate distant relatives sharing portions of the same genetic code. The results produced hundreds of potential connections: distant cousins, partial family matches, fragmented bloodlines stretching backward through generations. It was like dumping thousands of puzzle pieces onto a table without knowing what the finished picture looked like. But slowly, methodically, genealogists began building family trees, marriage records, military documents, birth certificates, old census reports, obituaries, property records. The investigation transformed into something closer to archaeology than police work. Teams spent months tracing relatives through decades of American history, narrowing possibilities branch by branch. Thousands of names became hundreds. Hundreds became dozens. Detectives focused on men matching certain criteria: age, geography, military background, criminal behavior patterns. The closer they looked, the more one name kept resurfacing quietly beneath the noise. Joseph James D'Angelo, former police officer, Navy veteran, lived in California during the attacks. The possibility hit investigators like a punch to the chest. A former cop. Suddenly dozens of details from the original crimes took on terrifying new meaning. The killer's understanding of police tactics, his ability to evade perimeter searches, the discipline, the calmness under pressure, the confidence moving through neighborhoods during active investigations. Detectives had long suspected the offender possessed law enforcement knowledge, but now the theory no longer felt abstract. It felt personal. D'Angelo had once worn a badge. He worked as a police officer in Exeter, California during the 1970s, precisely when a series of burglaries linked to the mysterious Visalia ransacker terrorized nearby communities. Investigators had later connected those crimes behaviorally to the Golden State Killer attacks. The timeline fit almost too perfectly. Then detectives uncovered another disturbing detail. D'Angelo had been fired from the police department after being arrested for shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer. A hammer, the same kind of weapon later used in several murders connected to the original Night Stalker. Investigators refused to move too quickly. The stakes were enormous. One mistake could destroy the case forever. They needed direct confirmation. DNA. So they began watching him. Surveillance teams followed D'Angelo through suburban Sacramento neighborhoods, documenting ordinary routines that felt surreal when compared against the monstrous crimes investigators believed he committed. He watered his lawn. He rode a motorcycle. He muttered angrily to himself sometimes while walking outside. Neighbors described him as irritable, strange, occasionally explosive over small disagreements. But nobody suspected they lived beside a man accused of committing some of the most infamous unsolved crimes in American history. One former neighbor later admitted the news made her physically sick. He was just there, she said, right there all those years. Investigators needed his DNA without alerting him. They waited patiently. One evening, surveillance officers collected an item discarded from his vehicle. Another sample reportedly came from a tissue retrieved from household trash. The evidence moved quietly into forensic laboratories where technicians compared the genetic profile against biological evidence preserved from crime scenes decades earlier. The result came back undeniable. It matched. After more than 40 years, the ghost finally had a name. On April 24th, 2018, police moved in. The arrest unfolded with shocking simplicity. No violent standoff. No desperate escape attempt. Officers surrounded D'Angelo outside his suburban home, while helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors emerged cautiously onto sidewalks, trying to understand why unmarked vehicles suddenly flooded their quiet street. Some assumed drugs. Others suspected financial crimes. Then, whispers spread through the crowd like electricity. Golden State Killer. The word sounded unreal. Reporters descended instantly. News helicopters filled the sky. Television networks interrupted programming nationwide. Former detectives who spent decades chasing the case broke down emotionally during interviews. Survivors stared at screens in disbelief. Many had reached a point where they believed the killer would die unidentified forever. But the greatest shock came from how ordinary he looked. An elderly man with gray hair, standing silently in handcuffs beneath flashing police lights. No dramatic appearance. No cinematic evil visible on his face. Just another aging suburban grandfather surrounded by officers. That image haunted the country immediately, because it forced people to confront a terrifying truth. Monsters do not always look monstrous. Inside interrogation rooms, investigators attempted to draw D'Angelo into conversation carefully. At first, he appeared confused, muttering to himself, speaking in fragments as though mentally deteriorating. Some wondered whether age or illness had weakened him significantly, but many detectives suspected manipulation. The Golden State Killer had spent decades controlling narratives, confusing victims, adapting behavior to survive. Nothing about him felt accidental. Then came one chilling moment investigators would never forget. Alone inside a room, D'Angelo reportedly whispered to himself, "I did all those things. I destroyed all those lives." The word sent shockwaves through the investigation. Whether confession or performance, they carried horrifying weight. As news coverage exploded globally, survivors finally learned the man accused of destroying their lives had lived freely for decades while they suffered in silence. Some reacted with rage. Others cried uncontrollably. Several admitted they felt numb. One woman described staring at his photograph for hours, unable to process that the terrifying figure from her nightmares had become an old man living quietly among ordinary families. And the public obsession intensified once details about his private life emerged. He had been married, raised children, attended birthday parties, hosted family dinners. Neighbors remembered seeing him doing yard work. People who interacted with him casually suddenly questioned every memory. Did he ever reveal signs? Did anyone suspect? Could a man responsible for such horrifying violence truly live an ordinary domestic life simultaneously? Psychologists studying serial offenders were not entirely surprised. Many predators compartmentalize behavior with terrifying effectiveness. They create separate identities, one for public life, another hidden beneath layers of secrecy and control. But the scale of D'Angelo's alleged crimes made the contrast especially disturbing. While survivors battled trauma for decades, he attended holidays and watched his daughters grow up. The emotional impact on victims became overwhelming once court proceedings began. Some survivors spoke publicly for the first time in decades. Elderly now, many still carried visible psychological scars from attacks committed during the 1970s. Several admitted they slept with weapons nearby for years afterward. Some marriages collapsed beneath trauma. Others described lifelong anxiety, panic attacks, or inability to trust strangers. One survivor said she spent 40 years believing the killer might return at any moment because he once called her repeatedly after the assault just to remind her he was still out there. The fear never truly ended. Courtrooms filled with journalists, former detectives, victims, and relatives desperate to witness justice finally arriving after decades of silence. D'Angelo often sat motionless in a wheelchair, appearing frail and weak. Yet many survivors refused to see vulnerability. To them, he remained a masked intruder standing over beds in darkness, threatening lives with absolute control. Then prosecutors revealed another horrifying detail. Investigators believe the known crimes represented only a fraction of his actual violence. Many burglaries and assaults from the same era remained unsolved. Some detectives suspected additional murders may never be connected conclusively. The true scale of devastation might never be fully understood because time destroyed evidence. Memories faded, and some victims died before learning the truth. The realization left communities shaken once again. For decades, California residents had unknowingly shared streets, stores, restaurants, and public spaces with a predator hiding in plain sight. He survived changing technology, evolving police methods, media scrutiny, and the passage of time itself. Entire generations grew up, while the man responsible for terrorizing the state quietly blended into ordinary life. And perhaps the most chilling part of all was this. He did not flee. He did not disappear overseas. He stayed, year after year, living among the same society that hunted him relentlessly, trusting that time would eventually bury the truth forever. For a while, it almost worked. The arrest should have ended the nightmare. That was what many people expected. A name finally attached to the face of a predator who haunted California for decades. DNA confirmation, criminal charges, national headlines. The ghost was no longer invisible. But instead of closure, the revelation opened something darker. Because once investigators began reconstructing Joseph D'Angelo's life beside the timeline of the crimes, the scale of deception became almost impossible to comprehend. While police searched for a mass predator through the 70s and 80s, D'Angelo was building an ordinary American life with terrifying precision. He got married. He raised children. He worked steady jobs. He attended family functions. He lived quietly in suburban neighborhoods where people waved politely while passing his driveway. And somehow, through all those years, nobody truly saw him. The contradiction disturbed even veteran homicide detectives. They had spent careers studying violent offenders, yet something about D'Angelo unsettled them differently. The Golden State Killer was not hiding in abandoned buildings or surviving on society's fringes. He was living inside normality itself. One former investigator later admitted that realization frightened him more than the murders. Because if a man capable of such calculated brutality could blend into ordinary suburban life for 40 years, then evil no longer felt distant or recognizable. It felt domestic, familiar, close. Neighbors described him as angry, unpredictable, occasionally explosive over small inconveniences. Some remembered hearing him screaming profanities in his backyard late at night. Others recalled strange behavior, pacing, muttering to himself, aggressive confrontations about trivial disputes. Yet none of it seemed extraordinary enough to suggest serial murder. Plenty of difficult people lived in suburban California. D'Angelo simply became another unpleasant older man behind a fence. One neighbor later described the unbearable guilt of hindsight. "You replay every interaction," she said. "Every weird moment suddenly means something." As reporters flooded Sacramento following the arrest, investigators quietly continued reopening old files connected to the case. The known numbers alone sounded horrifying enough. At least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, over 100 burglaries. But detectives feared the actual total could be significantly higher. The crime stretched across years when forensic science barely existed. Evidence disappeared. Reports were lost. Jurisdictions failed to communicate. Victims stayed silent out of fear or shame. Some cases likely vanished forever beneath decades of bureaucratic dust. And investigators knew something else. Predators like this rarely stop voluntarily. The question haunted the entire investigation. Why did the attack suddenly end? For years, criminologists debated possible explanations. Age, marriage, family responsibilities, fear of capture, psychological burnout. Some theorize the killer satisfied compulsions through other behaviors after abandoning violent assaults. Others suspected unconnected crimes existed beyond California, waiting to be discovered. The uncertainty disturbed survivors deeply because it suggested the darkness inside him never truly disappeared. It simply adapted. Inside courtrooms, victims finally faced a man accused of terrorizing them decades earlier. Many entered carrying emotions frozen in time since the 70s. Some had not spoken publicly about attacks, even to family members. Others spent years hiding trauma behind carefully constructed normal lives. Now, suddenly, cameras pointed toward them while journalists repeated details of crimes they had spent decades trying desperately to survive. One by one, survivors spoke. Their voices trembled, sometimes broke completely. Yet beneath the grief burned something stronger. Rage. A woman described waking to a flashlight beam inches from her face, while the intruder whispered threats in darkness. Another survivor recalled the sound of dishes rattling on her husband's back, while she prayed silently that he would stay perfectly still. One victim admitted she spent 40 years terrified every time the phone rang after midnight, because the attacker once called repeatedly after the assault just to remind her he still existed. The courtroom listened in silence. Even hardened reporters struggled emotionally during testimony, because these were not abstract crime statistics anymore. They were human lives suspended in terror for decades while the man responsible walked freely through ordinary American neighborhoods buying groceries and attending birthday parties. The emotional impact intensified once victims confronted the age difference. The Golden State Killer who invaded homes in the 70s existed in public memory as an athletic phantom sprinting through canals and climbing fences under cover darkness. Now he appeared in court as a frail, elderly man sitting motionless in a wheelchair. Some observers unfamiliar with the case questioned whether this quiet old figure could truly be the same predator once feared across California. Survivors had no doubt. Several stated publicly that the aging appearance changed nothing. Behind the wrinkles and white hair, they still saw the mass intruder, controlling bedrooms through fear and violence. Time had softened his body, perhaps, but not the memory of what he had done. Then prosecutors revealed evidence illustrating just how methodical the attacks really were. The killer often prowled neighborhoods for days beforehand. He studied escape routes carefully. He targeted homes near canals, parks, trails, and open spaces. He brought pre-cut shoelaces to bind victims. He unloaded guns found inside homes to eliminate resistance. Sometimes he entered houses before attacks, simply to move objects or unlock windows. The level of preparation horrified the public because it transformed the crimes from chaotic violence into organized hunting. This was not impulsive evil. It was calculated predation. Detectives also uncovered evidence suggesting D'Angelo maintained obsessive control long after assaults ended. Some victims continued receiving threatening phone calls years later. Others reported seeing suspicious figures outside homes after cooperating with police. Investigators believed the psychological terror mattered deeply to him. He wanted victims permanently afraid. And for many, that fear never left. One woman testified she still checked every door and window multiple times before sleeping even 40 years later. Another admitted she could never fully relax alone inside a house again. Some victims developed chronic anxiety disorders. Others suffered recurring nightmares well into old age. The attacks became invisible wounds carried through entire lifetimes. Meanwhile, public fascination with the case exploded globally. Documentaries appeared almost immediately. News channels replayed archival footage from the 70s beside fresh images of D'Angelo in custody. Podcasts dissected timelines obsessively. Former detectives became media figures overnight, recounting decades spent chasing shadows through California suburbs. True crime communities treated the arrest like the ending of an impossible mystery, once believed unsolvable forever. But behind the media frenzy remained an uncomfortable truth. The Golden State Killer was not caught because witnesses suddenly remembered something. He was not arrested because police outsmarted him traditionally. Technology exposed him. And that realization changed criminal investigations across America permanently. Genealogical DNA searching soon helped solve dozens of cold cases nationwide. Murderers who believed time guaranteed safety suddenly faced a terrifying new reality. A single distant relative uploading ancestry data could unknowingly expose entire bloodlines to forensic investigation. Detectives reopened forgotten evidence rooms searching for cases potentially solvable through similar methods. The Golden State Killer investigation became a blueprint for the future of cold case policing. Yet ethical questions emerged immediately. Civil liberties advocates worried about privacy. How much power should law enforcement have over public genetic databases? Could innocent relatives become investigative targets simply because they share DNA with criminals? The debate intensified across legal and scientific communities. But for survivors of the Golden State Killer attacks, the moral question felt simpler. Without genealogy technology, the man who destroyed their lives might have died peacefully unidentified. That possibility haunted everyone involved, especially investigators who spent decades hunting him unsuccessfully. Some retired detectives openly admitted they became emotionally consumed by the case over the years. Marriages failed, health deteriorated, careers revolved entirely around chasing one invisible predator. Several described feelings of personal failure every time another attack occurred during the 70s because they knew the killer remained free partly due to investigative limitations. Then suddenly, after 40 years, the impossible happened. The ghost materialized. And once he did, the illusion surrounding him collapsed rapidly. Reporters uncovered former co-workers describing D'Angelo's violent temper. Neighbors remembered hearing him screaming profanities unpredictably. Some relatives reportedly distanced themselves emotionally over the years due to erratic behavior. Small fragments of darkness emerged everywhere once investigators knew where to look. But no warning signs ever added up completely. That was the terrifying part. There was no dramatic double life visible publicly. No hidden basement filled with trophies discovered years earlier. No cinematic unraveling exposing obvious madness beneath the surface. Instead, there was just an ordinary aging man carrying unimaginable secrets while society moved around him normally for decades. And the more investigators learned, the more disturbing the contrast became. During years when survivors battled trauma, D'Angelo took family vacations. While detectives searched crime scenes for microscopic evidence, he attended birthday dinners. While terrified women slept with knives beside beds fearing the killer might return, he tucked his children into bed at night. The duality felt monstrous beyond comprehension. Then came one of the most chilling moments in the entire case. Prosecutors revealed evidence suggesting D'Angelo may have followed media coverage obsessively over the years. Investigators believed he likely watched documentaries, read newspaper articles, and monitored public discussions about the crimes committed under masks decades earlier. The possibility meant he spent years quietly observing investigators struggle, while knowing they still had no idea who he really was. Imagine the confidence required for that, the arrogance, to sit in living rooms watching television reports about murders you committed while the world searches desperately for someone else. The realization sickened survivors. For decades, they imagined the killer hiding somewhere in fear of capture. Instead, investigators now believed he may have felt secure enough to remain in the same state where crimes occurred, trusting that time itself protected him better than any disguise ever could. And for 40 years, he was right. Long before the name Golden State Killer existed, before DNA technology transformed cold case investigations into digital manhunts, before survivors finally saw an old man sitting silently in court, there was only fear. Raw, spreading fear moving through California suburbs like poison in the bloodstream. In the late 1970s, entire communities lived beneath the suffocating belief that something evil was watching from the darkness just beyond backyard fences. Women checked locks 3 or 4 times before bed. Men slept with loaded firearms beside mattresses. Parents stared through windows late at night, searching empty streets for movement. And somewhere nearby, hidden behind ordinary routines and smiling public appearances, Joseph D'Angelo allegedly prepared for his next attack with terrifying patience. Investigators later realized the killer did not simply attack victims. He hunted them. The preparation often began days earlier, sometimes weeks. Survivors described hearing strange noises outside homes before assaults occurred, footsteps near bedroom windows. rustling bushes, gates opening quietly in the middle of the night, dogs barking toward darkness with no visible cause. Some victims noticed objects disappearing and reappearing later in bizarre locations. Others found signs someone had entered their homes without stealing anything. Detectives came to believe the offender frequently prowled neighborhoods beforehand, studying routines obsessively while choosing targets with surgical calculation. He watched people, learned schedules, memorized escape routes, counted police response times, and perhaps most horrifying of all, investigators suspected he experienced excitement long before assaults actually occurred. The stalking itself became part of the ritual. One survivor later described the psychological horror perfectly. You realize afterward he probably knew more about your life than some friends did. The attacks themselves unfolded with terrifying precision. The intruder usually struck after midnight when neighborhoods fell completely silent. He slipped through unlocked windows or forced entry. So, quietly, many victims never woke until flashlight beam hit their faces. Couples described the same nightmare repeatedly. Sudden light exploding inside dark bedrooms. A masked figure standing over the bed holding a handgun. Commands whispered in cold, controlled tones while panic froze the room instantly. Then came the bindings. Shoelaces, pre-cut lengths prepared beforehand. The detail haunted investigators because it proved the offender arrived organized and deliberate. This was not spontaneous violence. He planned every movement carefully. Male victims were often forced face down while dishes or objects were balanced on their backs. If they moved, if the plates rattled, the killer threatened immediate execution. Survivors later admitted the psychological torment of helplessness remained one of the deepest scars left behind. And through it all, the intruder remained eerily calm. Victims described moments where he whispered softly to himself while moving through homes. Sometimes he sounded nervous, even emotional. Other times his voice became completely detached, almost mechanical. Detectives struggled for years to understand whether these mood shifts reflected genuine psychological instability or deliberate manipulation designed to confuse victims. Either explanation terrified them, because both suggested someone deeply dangerous. The media coverage intensified with every attack. California newspapers published maps tracking incidents across suburban communities. Television anchors warned viewers nightly about the East Area rapist. Sketch artists released composite drawings based on fragmented witness accounts, but no image captured him clearly. Some sketches showed a young athletic man. Others depicted heavier features. Witness descriptions contradicted each other constantly because victims usually saw him briefly in darkness under unimaginable stress. The uncertainty became its own kind of nightmare. Anyone could be the killer, a co-worker, a neighbor, a stranger walking through a grocery store. One detective later recalled how paranoia infected entire communities. People stopped trusting unfamiliar vehicles parked on residential streets. Men jogging after dark were reported to police repeatedly. Some residents even suspected neighbors based on trivial behavior. California suburbs transformed into landscapes of suspicion where everyone feared the monster might already live nearby. And investigators quietly feared the same thing, because the killer's knowledge of local geography seemed almost impossible otherwise. He escaped through canals, parks, bike trails, drainage systems. He disappeared before police could establish effective perimeters. 9 teams repeatedly lost ascent near open spaces connecting neighborhoods. The offender moved confidently through suburban layouts, like someone deeply familiar with the terrain. Then came another disturbing realization. Some attacks suggested military or law enforcement training. The offender demonstrated discipline under pressure. He controlled victims efficiently. He avoided leaving evidence. He monitored police activity intelligently. Detectives working the case privately debated whether the killer possessed professional experience related to tactical movement or criminal investigation. The theory remained speculative for decades, until Joseph D'Angelo entered the picture. Former police officer, former Navy serviceman. Suddenly, years of strange investigative details began aligning with horrifying clarity. But during the 70s, investigators had no idea who they were truly hunting. They only understood the scale of terror spreading across California. Every new attack amplified public outrage. Citizens demanded answers. Politicians pressured law enforcement aggressively. Task forces formed across multiple jurisdictions. Yet communication failures constantly undermined progress. Departments hoarded information. Records moved slowly. Jurisdictional boundaries fragmented investigations into disconnected pieces. The killer exploited every weakness. When neighborhoods increased patrols, he shifted areas. When media attention intensified, he adapted tactics. When investigators released information publicly, he appeared to evolve again. He remained unpredictable enough to stay invisible. And then the violence escalated further. The transition from serial rape to murder shocked even experienced homicide investigators. The first killings connected later to the original Night Stalker carried the same signature atmosphere of domination and control, but now victims were left dead inside bedrooms where they once believed themselves safest. Couples bludgeoned while sleeping. Bodies discovered by horrified relatives or neighbors. Entire communities waking to headlines announcing another brutal double homicide. Fear became suffocating. People installed metal bars over windows. Alarm system, companies struggled to keep up with demand. Gun sales skyrocketed throughout California suburbs. Some residents organized armed patrols at night. Women refused to stay home alone after dark. Yet despite all the precautions, the killer continued slipping through neighborhoods undetected, like a phantom immune to ordinary human fear. And perhaps the most terrifying aspect of all was this. He appeared to enjoy the fear. Investigators uncovered evidence suggesting the offender followed media coverage closely. Victims reported receiving taunting phone calls after attacks. Some heard heavy breathing. Others recognized the same voice from assaults, whispering threats through telephone lines years later. The killer wanted survivors to know he remained out there somewhere watching, listening, remembering. That psychological warfare lasted decades. Many survivors later admitted the attacks never truly ended emotionally because the uncertainty remained alive for years afterward. The killer was unidentified, uncaught, invisible. Every strange noise at night reopened old terror instantly. Some women changed homes repeatedly searching for safety. Some marriages collapsed under trauma and fear. Some victims developed chronic insomnia, anxiety disorders, panic attacks. Others refused interviews entirely because revisiting memories felt unbearable even decades later. Meanwhile, the man investigators now believed responsible kept living freely, working ordinary jobs, attending family gatherings, shopping at local stores, watching television reports about crimes he allegedly committed. The duality disturbed criminologists profoundly once D'Angelo was identified. How could someone capable of such calculated cruelty function normally inside family life? How did nobody uncover the darkness hidden beneath ordinary routines for 40 years? Psychologists studying serial predators pointed toward compartmentalization, the ability to separate violent compulsions from public identity completely. But even experts admitted the Golden State Killer case represented an extreme example. Most offenders eventually unraveled publicly through addiction, impulsive behavior, or escalating recklessness. D'Angelo appeared to maintain functional normality for decades while carrying unimaginable secrets privately. And there were signs. Former co-workers later described explosive anger. Neighbors recalled aggressive outbursts over trivial issues. Some family acquaintances mentioned controlling behavior and unpredictable temper. Yet none of it added together clearly enough to expose a serial predator. In hindsight, the clues seemed obvious. At the time, they looked like ordinary unpleasantness from a difficult man. That realization haunted the public after his arrest, because it shattered comforting assumptions about evil looking visibly different from everyone else. When court proceedings intensified, survivors confronted another painful truth. The world treated the Golden State Killer investigation like a sensational mystery finally solved. But for victims of crimes never became entertainment. They remained deeply personal wounds stretching across entire lifetimes. One survivor described hearing reporters discuss attack details casually on television and feeling physically sick. Another admitted she avoided true crime documentaries entirely because dramatic reenactments triggered panic attacks decades after the assault. Behind every headline existed real people carrying invisible damage into old age. and many of them feared the full truth might never emerge completely. Investigators believed additional crimes connected to D'Angelo likely remained unidentified. Some evidence deteriorated beyond testing. Some victims may never have reported assaults. Certain murders from the same era still carried eerie similarities without definitive forensic links. The possibility that the Golden State Killer's true number of victims exceeded official counts remained deeply disturbing, especially because the offender almost escaped justice forever. If genealogy databases had not evolved when they did, Joseph D'Angelo might have died peacefully unidentified. Another elderly suburban grandfather whose terrifying secrets vanished permanently into history. That possibility lingered heavily over the investigation. For decades, the killer survived because technology had not yet caught up with him. And somewhere during all those years, he likely believed he had already won. The closer investigators looked at Joseph D'Angelo's life, the more disturbing the timeline became. It was not simply the overlap between his movements and the crimes. It was the ordinary rhythm surrounding them. One night, according to prosecutors, a masked intruder stalked suburban neighborhoods carrying shoelaces, a flashlight, and a handgun. Days later, the same man might have attended a family gathering, gone shopping, or spoken casually with neighbors beneath bright California sunlight as if nothing had happened. The contrast felt almost impossible for the public to absorb. People wanted monsters to appear monstrous. They wanted warning signs obvious enough to separate evil from normal life. But the Golden State Killer case destroyed that illusion completely. Because for decades, he looked like everybody else. And during those same decades, survivors remained trapped inside memories they could never fully escape. One woman described waking in terror every night for years after her assault because she became convinced someone stood outside her bedroom window watching her sleep. Another survivor admitted she could not tolerate complete darkness anymore. Some couples never recovered emotionally from the attacks. Husbands carried guilt for being physically restrained, while their wives were assaulted beside them. Wives carried guilt for surviving, when others did not. Trauma infected relationships silently, spreading across families long after crimes disappeared from headlines. Children of survivors often grew up inside households shaped by invisible fear. Doors checked repeatedly before bed. Curtains permanently closed after sunset. Lights left on through the night. Parents panicking over strange sounds no one else noticed. The Golden State Killer left behind more than crime scenes. He left psychological wreckage stretching across generations. And while survivors lived inside that fear, the investigation itself slowly became legend among law enforcement. Young detectives entering California police departments during the 1980s and 1990s heard stories about the East Area Rapist, an original night stalker the way rookie officers hear about ghosts haunting old buildings. Veteran investigators described impossible crime scenes, near captures that collapsed into darkness, footprints disappearing beside canals. Terrified victims whispered descriptions that never quite matched each other. The killer became almost mythological, a predator so elusive many believed he would never be identified. Then DNA arrived and shattered mythology. The evidence proved the killer was not supernatural. He was human, aging, bleeding, leaving traces behind like everyone else. That realization changed everything. During the early years of forensic genealogy, detectives approached the Golden State Killer case cautiously. The method itself remained controversial and largely untested at such scale. Some investigators worried public genealogy databases would never produce meaningful results. Others feared legal complications could jeopardize prosecutions. But the desperation surrounding the case outweighed hesitation. 40 years had passed. Traditional investigative methods failed repeatedly. Survivors were aging. Some had already died waiting for justice. Time was running out. Genealogists began constructing massive family trees from partial DNA matches. Third cousins, fourth cousins, distant relatives separated across generations. Each branch required painstaking verification through public records and historical documents. The process consumed months. Detectives compared ages, locations, military histories, employment backgrounds. Gradually, the pool narrowed toward a small group of men who fit critical criteria. Then Joseph D'Angelo emerged from the shadows of paperwork. Born in 1945, military veteran, former police officer, lived in areas connected directly to crimes. Investigators felt the pressure instantly. If they were wrong, the consequences could destroy the investigation publicly. If they were right, they stood on the edge of solving one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. Surveillance began quietly. Teams followed D'Angelo through Sacramento suburbs documenting routines that felt almost painfully mundane considering the allegations surrounding him. He drove normally, shopped normally, walked through neighborhoods like any retired older man. But investigators noticed something unsettling during surveillance operations. Even in old age, he appeared intensely aware of surroundings, alert, controlled. Some detectives later admitted they sensed an unsettling presence around him difficult to describe logically. Then came the discarded DNA samples. Investigators secretly collected items touched and abandoned by D'Angelo in public spaces. The evidence entered forensic labs where technicians compared genetic markers against biological material preserved from crime scenes stretching back to the 70s. When the match returned positive, silence reportedly filled parts of the investigation team. After decades of uncertainty, the impossible finally became real. The Golden State Killer had a face, and that face belonged to a former police officer living quietly in suburban California. The arrest triggered immediate national obsession. News helicopters circled above D'Angelo's neighborhood, while reporters flooded streets, searching desperately for interviews with shocked neighbors. Television stations replayed archive footage from the original investigations beside new images of an elderly man led into custody. For survivors, the emotional impact felt overwhelming. Some cried uncontrollably after hearing the news. Others sat silently, unable to process it. Several admitted they never truly believed the case would be solved. One survivor described turning on the television and feeling physically dizzy seeing the man accused of destroying her life after decades spent imagining him as faceless darkness. Another victim said the arrest felt surreal because she had grown old waiting for it. And yet, even after the DNA confirmation, unanswered questions remained everywhere. Why did he stop? How many additional crimes remained unidentified? Did anyone close to him suspect anything? What existed inside the mind of a man capable of such prolonged double existence? Psychologists studying violent offenders examined the case intensely. Some experts theorized D'Angelo displayed traits consistent with psychopathy, manipulation, emotional compartmentalization, lack of empathy, obsessive control. Others focus on the escalation pattern visible throughout the crimes. Burglaries evolved into sexual assaults. Assaults evolved into murder. The progression suggested compulsions growing more violent over time. But one aspect continued disturbing investigators above all others: the planning, the sheer organization required. The Golden State Killer studied victims methodically before attacks. He selected neighborhoods strategically. He monitored police movements. He adapted behavior repeatedly to avoid capture. This was not chaotic violence driven by sudden emotion. It resembled predatory stalking refined through experience. And perhaps most chillingly, investigators believed he enjoyed the process itself. The fear, the anticipation, the control. Victims often recalled moments where the intruder seemed almost energized by terror inside the room. He whispered threats slowly, controlled breathing, manipulated panic deliberately. Some survivors later said the emotional cruelty felt even more devastating than physical violence because it transformed ordinary homes into permanent sources of trauma. Meanwhile, the public struggled to reconcile D'Angelo's appearance with the crimes themselves. Courtroom sketches showed a frail old man sitting motionless beneath fluorescent lights. Reporters described him as quiet, emotionless, detached. To outsiders unfamiliar with the case, he hardly resembled the terrifying predator who once sprinted through suburban canals, escaping police helicopters. But survivors never forgot what lived beneath the surface. During victim impact statements, elderly men and women confronted him directly. Their voices carried decades of pain compressed into single moments. Some addressed him with fury, others with heartbreaking calmness. One survivor described how the attack permanently stole her sense of safety from the world. Another explained that even after 40 years, she still startled awake at small noises during the night. And through it all, D'Angelo often remained silent, motionless, listening. The silence itself disturbed many observers. There were no dramatic courtroom outbursts, no public explanations, no detailed confessions satisfying public curiosity. Instead, the man accused of terrorizing California for decades sat quietly while victims reconstructed nightmares he allegedly created long ago. Eventually, prosecutors negotiated a plea agreement partly to spare elderly survivors the emotional toll of lengthy trials. In 2020, Joseph D'Angelo formally admitted responsibility for numerous murders and assaults connected to the Golden State Killer investigation. The courtroom became emotionally overwhelming. Survivors listened as prosecutors described decades of violence in horrifying detail: murder scenes, home invasions, psychological torture, entire lives shattered across California communities. Some victims wept openly. Former detectives who spent careers chasing the case struggled visibly with emotion. Then came sentencing. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole. No death penalty. No dramatic final confrontation. Just an old man facing the consequences of crimes committed across another lifetime. But even after sentencing, the case refused to feel completely finished. Too many questions remained unanswered. Investigators believed there were likely additional burglaries never conclusively linked, possibly more assaults, perhaps even murders hidden permanently beneath the limitations of old forensic science. The Golden State Killer investigation solved one mystery while exposing countless smaller shadows around it. And for many survivors, justice itself felt complicated. The arrest ended uncertainty, but it could not restore stolen years. It could not erase trauma. It could not return murdered loved ones. The damage stretched too far across time. In quiet moments after the headlines faded, many survivors described the same haunting realization. For decades, the man responsible for unimaginable suffering slept peacefully in suburban California, while his victims lay awake reliving the terror over and over again. And nobody around him ever truly knew. The sentence did not erase the fear. That became painfully obvious once the cameras disappeared from courthouse steps and the media frenzy slowly cooled into documentaries, podcasts, and archive headlines. Joseph D'Angelo had finally been identified, arrested, and sentenced, but the emotional wreckage left behind by the Golden State Killer stretched too deeply across time to disappear neatly inside a courtroom. Survivors still carried the same nightmares. Families still carried the same grief. Entire communities still remembered what it felt like to live through years when darkness itself seemed dangerous. And for many people, one question continued echoing louder than all the others. How did he get away with it for so long? The answer revealed something terrifying about the era itself. During the 1970s, criminal investigations operated inside a fragmented system full of technological blind spots. Police departments rarely communicated efficiently across jurisdictions. Evidence collection standards varied dramatically. Computer databases barely existed. DNA science remained decades away. A killer could attack in Sacramento, move south, change methods slightly, and essentially become invisible to entirely different investigators. The Golden State Killer exploited those weaknesses perfectly. At first, authorities believed the Visalia ransacker burglaries represented one offender. Then the East Area rapist attacks emerged separately. Later, Southern California investigators hunted the original Night Stalker murders as another case entirely. The crimes appeared connected emotionally, but lacked definitive forensic proof during those early years. Valuable time vanished while detectives operated in isolated silos, each group chasing only fragments of the same predator. And the predator understood that. Investigators later became convinced Joseph D'Angelo followed law enforcement activity obsessively. Some believed he monitored newspaper reports daily. Others suspected he listened to police scanners or studied public statements carefully to track investigative progress. His background as a former police officer gave him insights ordinary criminals simply did not possess. He knew how investigators thought. He understood response times. He recognized procedural weaknesses. Most importantly, he understood patience. The Golden State Killer did not behave recklessly. He stalked neighborhoods carefully before attacks. He chose escape routes methodically. He attacked when conditions favored him. He disappeared when pressure intensified. Some detectives later admitted the offender displayed a level of discipline rarely seen even among experienced violent criminals. And beneath that discipline lurked something colder: control. Everything about the crimes revolved around it. Victims described the intruder speaking softly while issuing commands. He dictated movement inside rooms with terrifying calmness. He manipulated fear deliberately, forcing victims to remain motionless for hours while he prowled through homes stealing objects and whispering threats. Even the bizarre detail of stacking dishes on victims' backs reflected psychological domination more than practical necessity. The killer wanted people trapped inside helplessness. That emotional damage lasted decades. One survivor later admitted she still could not tolerate hearing footsteps outside her home after dark without feeling panic rise instantly in her chest. Another explained she spent years sleeping lightly because her brain never fully accepted that nighttime could be safe again. Some victims avoided discussing the attacks publicly for decades because the memories remained too overwhelming. And yet, despite the immense trauma, many survivors became central voices pushing investigators never to abandon the case. Through the years, cold case detectives stayed connected with victims who refused to let the investigation disappear quietly into forgotten evidence rooms. Some survivors followed every development obsessively. They clipped newspaper articles, recorded television interviews, memorized suspect theories. Hope became painful over time because every promising lead eventually collapsed into disappointment. Then came the DNA era. Suddenly, evidence preserved since the 70s transformed into something alive again. Biological traces once considered useless now carried the potential to expose identities hidden for decades. Detectives reopened boxes stored so long the cardboard itself had begun deteriorating. Old rape kits, hair samples, blood evidence. Items sealed and forgotten beneath layers of dust. And slowly, science started speaking louder than memory ever could. The DNA connections linking multiple crime scenes changed the investigation permanently. The realization that one offender committed attacks across Northern and Southern California horrified even veteran detectives. The geographical scale alone seemed staggering. This was not a local predator terrorizing one city. It was a mobile, organized offender moving across the state while evading detection for years. The media responded instantly once the unified Golden State Killer label emerged. The name carried cinematic darkness that captured public fascination immediately. True crime authors revisited old investigations. Documentaries explored forgotten evidence. Online communities dissected timelines and suspect theories obsessively. The case transformed into one of America's most infamous unsolved mysteries. And all the while, Joseph DeAngelo continued living normally. That contrast became one of the most disturbing elements of the entire story. Because the killer did not hide underground. He did not flee the country. He did not reinvent himself dramatically under false identities. He remained in California, living ordinary life while survivors rebuilt shattered lives around invisible trauma. Former neighbors later described the surreal horror of learning who had lived beside them. Some remembered him yelling aggressively during minor disputes. Others recalled strange outbursts or hostile behavior that seemed unsettling in hindsight. Yet, nobody imagined serial murder. Nobody imagined the elderly man mowing his lawn might also be the same predator whose crimes once dominated California headlines. One neighbor later described feeling physically ill after the arrest. You start wondering how close evil can really get before anyone notices, she said. That question lingered nationwide after DeAngelo's identity became public, because the case shattered comfortable assumptions about how predators look and behave. Society often imagines serial killers as visibly monstrous outsiders incapable of functioning normally. The Golden State Killer case revealed something far more frightening. A man capable of extraordinary violence while maintaining the appearance of ordinary suburban existence for decades. Psychologists examining the case pointed toward compartmentalization again. Some offenders separate public identity from violent behavior so completely that people around them never recognize contradictions. But even experts acknowledge the scale of DeAngelo's alleged double life felt deeply unsettling. While survivors struggled with lifelong trauma, he attended birthdays, watched television, paid bills, raised children, and aged quietly inside American suburbia. Then came the victim impact statements. Courtrooms transformed into emotional battlegrounds where survivors finally confronted the man accused of terrorizing them decades earlier. Elderly voices shook with rage, grief, exhaustion. Some survivors addressed D'Angelo directly. Others spoke toward prosecutors or judges because looking at him felt unbearable. The testimony devastated observers. One woman described how the assault destroyed her sense of safety permanently. Another survivor explained she still checked locks obsessively 40 years later. A husband spoke about the helplessness of hearing his wife attacked while restrained beside her. Another victim admitted she considered suicide repeatedly during the years after crime because the psychological damage felt impossible to escape. And through every statement, D'Angelo remained largely silent, still, detached, listening without visible emotion. The silence angered many survivors more than any outburst could have. They wanted answers, explanations, something acknowledging the enormity of destruction left behind. Instead, they faced an aging man who often appeared distant, almost disconnected from the horror surrounding him. Then prosecutors revealed another unsettling detail. Investigators believe D'Angelo may have spent years following media coverage about the crimes, watching documentaries, reading articles, monitoring public fascination surrounding the unidentified predator authorities could never catch. Imagine that reality. A man sitting quietly in his living room watching television specials about murders he committed decades earlier, while reporters speculate endlessly about who the killer might be. The arrogance behind it felt monstrous. And perhaps that arrogance explains why he stayed in California all those years. He trusted invisibility created by time itself. Witness memories faded. Detectives retired. Evidence deteriorated. Society moved on toward newer tragedies and fresher headlines. Eventually, the Golden State Killer became less immediate fear and more historical mystery, until forensic genealogy changed the rules forever. The technique itself revolutionized cold case investigations nationwide after D'Angelo's arrest. Suddenly, detectives across America realized DNA did not need to match suspects directly anymore. It only needed to connect distantly to relatives willing to upload ancestry information online. Murderers who once believed time guaranteed safety faced terrifying new possibilities. Cases dormant for decades reopened overnight. Unknown killers identified through distant cousins. Human remains finally given names after generations of silence. The Golden State Killer investigation became a blueprint for the future of forensic investigation. Yet beneath the scientific breakthroughs remained deeply human devastation. No technology could erase what survivors endured. No conviction restored stolen years. No sentence repaired broken families. Some victims died before the arrest ever happened. Others reached old age carrying fear born in the 70s. And even after justice finally arrived, many survivors admitted the emotional scars never disappeared completely. Because the Golden State Killer did not simply attack people. He changed the way they experienced the world forever. And perhaps the darkest realization of all came afterward, once investigators pieced together the timeline fully. During the exact years California feared an invisible predator stalking suburban homes at night, the man responsible often woke the next morning and blended back into ordinary daylight like nothing had happened at all. Even after conviction, investigators continued reopening old evidence boxes connected to the Golden State Killer case, and every new discovery carried the same suffocating realization. The known crimes may represent only part of the truth. Detectives spent decades hunting one predator across California. Yet the deeper they looked into Joseph D'Angelo's past, the more shadows appeared around the edges of the official timeline. Unsolved burglaries, suspicious prowling incidents, assaults with eerie similarities but insufficient forensic evidence, murders from the same era that never fully fit anywhere else. The possibility that some victims would never be identified lingered heavily over everyone involved in the investigation. Because serial predators rarely leave complete maps behind. They leave fragments, fear, broken timelines, and unanswered questions that survive long after arrests finally happen. The Golden State Killer case became more than a solved cold case. It became a disturbing lesson about how easily violent predators can disappear inside ordinary society when technology, communication, and timing failed to align. During the 1970s, entire police departments lacked tools modern investigators now consider basic. Crime scene preservation standards varied wildly. DNA analysis did not exist. Surveillance cameras were rare. Information moved slowly through paper reports, phone calls, and disconnected filing systems. A man like D'Angelo thrived inside those gaps. He understood geography. He understood procedure. Most importantly, he understood patience. Investigators later discovered how methodically he selected targets. Many homes backed onto canals, bike trails, schoolyards, or open fields allowing rapid escape into darkness. He often attacked neighborhoods where houses looked nearly identical, making witness recollections less useful. Some victims believe the intruder may have entered their homes previously to study layouts or unlock windows before returning later during assaults. The planning felt military, cold, measured, and yet beneath that control existed flashes of something unstable. Victims sometimes heard him muttering angrily to himself during attacks. Others described sudden mood shifts where the intruder sounded panicked or emotional before becoming calm again moments later. Detectives debated those details endlessly for years. Were they genuine psychological fractures or manipulative performances designed to confuse victims deliberately? Nobody knew for certain. And perhaps that uncertainty made the case even more terrifying. Because the Golden State Killer never fit neatly into public expectations of what a serial predator should look like psychologically. He displayed discipline and chaos simultaneously. Organized planning mixed with bizarre emotional behavior. Some criminologists believed he experienced deep internal rage barely contained beneath controlled routines. Others theorized the emotional displays represented calculated sadism meant to intensify terror. Either explanation painted a horrifying picture. Meanwhile, survivors continued living with consequences extending far beyond the original attacks. One woman admitted she still slept with lights on decades later. Another described severe panic every time someone knocked unexpectedly at her door after dark. Some survivors became hypervigilant parents. Terrified danger could emerge suddenly from ordinary environments. Others isolated themselves socially because trust never fully returned after the assaults. The trauma moved quietly through generations. Children grew up sensing fear inside homes without fully understanding its origin. Marriages strained beneath anxiety and emotional withdrawal. Entire family histories changed because one man spent years invading homes across California. And still, through all those decades, Joseph D'Angelo allegedly remained free. That reality continued shocking the public long after his sentencing. People wanted to understand how someone accused of such monstrous violence could maintain ordinary routine simultaneously. Former co-workers described him as moody, volatile, sometimes intimidating, but not obviously monstrous. Neighbors remembered arguments over trivial matters, loud outbursts, strange behavior at times. Yet none of it suggested serial murder. That disconnect became psychologically disturbing for society itself, because it forced people to confront a terrifying possibility. Predators may not appear visibly evil. They may exist behind ordinary suburban fences, hidden beneath routines so mundane nobody questions them. One investigator later explained it bluntly. The scariest thing about him was how normal he looked. And perhaps no image captured that horror more clearly than the arrest itself. No dramatic chase. No gunfight. No final bahía en confrontación. Just an elderly man standing beneath bright suburban lights, while police quietly closed around him after decades spent hunting ghosts through California darkness. The simplicity felt surreal compared to the enormity of the crimes. Then came the courtroom revelations. Victims described years of fear after assaults. Former detectives recounted exhausting investigations stretching across careers. Prosecutors reconstructed timelines revealing how the offender evolved from prowler to burglar, burglar to serial rapist to murderer. The progression terrified criminologists because it illustrated compulsions escalating steadily over time. Violence became ritualized. The stalking, the bindings, the whispered threats, the psychological control. Each crime reflected growing confidence and deepening cruelty. Yet eventually the attack stopped. That fact remained one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the case even after D'Angelo's conviction. Why stop? Serial offenders rarely abandon violent compulsions completely without external pressure. Some experts suggested marriage and family life altered his routines. Others theorized aging reduced physical capability. A few investigators believed near captures or growing forensic awareness frightened him into stopping. But another possibility lingered uneasily beneath the surface. Maybe he simply learned to suppress the behavior or redirect it. The uncertainty disturbed survivors deeply because it meant the darkness inside him never fully received explanation. Court proceedings established responsibility for crimes, but they did not provide psychological clarity. D'Angelo remained largely silent publicly. No extensive confessions, no detailed interviews, no comprehensive explanation revealing how a former police officer transformed into one of America's most notorious serial predators. That silence created its own kind of horror because it left investigators, survivors, and the public staring into a void where answers should have existed. Who was he really beneath the masks and headlines? What thoughts moved through his mind during years spent evading capture? Did he feel guilt, fear, pleasure, or nothing at all? Even experienced criminal psychologists struggled to interpret him fully because the public persona revealed so little. In court, he often appeared emotionless, detached, physically diminished by age. Yet survivors remember someone entirely different, energetic, threatening, dominant, terrifyingly confident. Two versions of the same man existing across decades. And perhaps the truth lives somewhere in between. The Golden State Killer case also transformed public understanding of forensic genealogy forever. Before D'Angelo's arrest, many people viewed Ancestry DNA services as harmless entertainment, tools for discovering ethnic backgrounds or distant relatives. Suddenly, those same databases became investigative weapons capable of exposing killers who believed time guaranteed safety. Cold case units across America watched closely. Soon other unsolved murders began falling one after another through similar methods. Unknown remains received names. Decades-old homicide investigations reopened successfully. Families who spent generations without answers finally learned the truth. But the technique sparked intense ethical debates. Privacy advocates questioned whether relatives unknowingly exposed family members to police investigations simply by uploading DNA profiles. Civil liberties groups warned about expanding surveillance potential. Legal scholars debated boundaries between public safety and genetic privacy. Yet for survivors of violent crimes, the debate often felt deeply personal. Without genealogy databases, Joseph D'Angelo might have died peacefully unidentified. That possibility haunted many investigators more than the controversy itself. One retired detective admitted the case changed how he viewed time in criminal investigations forever. During the 70s and 80s, detectives believed cold cases gradually faded toward permanent unsolvability. Witnesses died. Evidence deteriorated. Public interest disappeared. The Golden State Killer case reversed that assumption completely. Technology evolved faster than the killer anticipated. Time no longer protected him. Instead, time betrayed him. And perhaps that realization represents the most profound shift created by the case. For decades, a Golden State Killer symbolized failure, a phantom predator escaping justice, while survivors carried invisible wounds into old age. Then suddenly, through science unimaginable during the original investigations, the invisible became visible again. The ghost gained a name. The predator gained a face. But closure remained incomplete, because no courtroom sentence could restore decades stolen by fear. No conviction erased memories of flashlight beams cutting through darkness at 2 a.m. No forensic breakthrough repaired shattered marriages or returned murdered loved ones. The investigation solved the mystery of identity, but emotional devastation survived beyond legal resolution. Even now, some survivors still describe moments where ordinary sounds reopen old panic instantly. Footsteps outside windows, a creaking gate, a late-night phone call. Fear learned deeply enough never fully disappears. And somewhere inside California suburbs, many older residents still remember what those years felt like before the arrest finally happened. Years when every strange noise after midnight carried a terrifying possibility that the Golden State Killer might already be inside the house. By the time Joseph D'Angelo stood in court facing life imprisonment, An entire generation of Californians had already lived and grown old beneath the shadow of his crimes. Some survivors entered the courtroom with gray hair and walking canes, carrying memories born in another lifetime. Former detectives who once sprinted through dark neighborhoods chasing flashlight beams now sat retired in gallery seats, watching the final chapter unfold with exhausted disbelief. The Golden State Killer investigation had stretched across so many decades that it no longer felt like one case. It felt like an era of fear embedded permanently into California history. And yet, even at the end, the silence surrounding D'Angelo remained deeply unsettling. No dramatic explanation, no public unraveling, no detailed confession revealing hidden motives. The man accused of terrorizing suburban communities for years rarely offered anything emotionally satisfying to survivors desperate for answers. Instead, prosecutors reconstructed the story through evidence, timelines, witness testimony, and DNA science, while the accused sat largely expressionless nearby. That silence forced survivors to create meaning from fragments. Some believed rage drove him. Others believed power. A few investigators argued the crimes reflected deep psychological compulsions escalating over time beyond ordinary human understanding. But no theory fully explained how one man could move between ordinary family life and extraordinary violence with such terrifying precision. And maybe that was the hardest truth for people to accept. There was no simple explanation. No single moment transforming an ordinary person into a predator. Only darkness hidden beneath years of routine existence. The courtroom testimony exposed just how profoundly the crimes altered lives long after physical injuries healed. One survivor described spending decades unable to sleep peacefully beside open windows because the sound of nighttime air moving curtains instantly brought back memories of the attack. Another admitted she developed panic whenever she saw flashlights unexpectedly in dark rooms. Some victims spoke about marriages collapsing under the weight of trauma and fear. Others described carrying shame silently for years because public attitudes towards sexual assault during the 1970s often blamed victims rather than offenders. That social reality complicated investigations enormously during the original crimes. Many victims hesitated reporting details publicly. Some feared humiliation. Others feared retaliation. And because the attacker repeatedly threatened victims and families with death, the psychological pressure remained overwhelming long after assaults ended. The Golden State Killer understood fear intimately. He weaponized it better than almost any criminal investigators had encountered. During attacks, he controlled entire environments psychologically, not just physically. Survivors remembered his whispering voice more vividly than the weapon itself. They remembered how he moved silently through bedrooms, how he paused deliberately between threats, how he forced victims to remain trapped inside uncertainty for hours at a time. The emotional terror became inseparable from the violence. That terror echoed outward through communities across California. Newspaper archives from the late 70s reveal entire neighborhoods consumed by panic. Residents attended emergency town meetings discussing home security strategies. Police departments distributed safety pamphlets while simultaneously struggling to reassure populations they could not truly protect. Women traveled in groups after dark. Men organized armed patrols. Alarm system advertisements exploded across local television and newspapers. Suburban California changed permanently during those years. People stopped trusting the night. And perhaps most chillingly, the man responsible allegedly experienced all of it from inside ordinary society itself. Investigators believe D'Angelo likely watched public reactions carefully. He may have seen televised fear spreading through neighborhoods he once prowled silently. He may have read headlines about police failures while sitting comfortably inside his own home. Some detectives suspected the media attention itself fueled his sense of control and superiority. That possibility sickened survivors, because it suggested the killer spent years privately enjoying the chaos left behind. Former investigators later described the emotional devastation repeated failures caused law enforcement during the original manhunt. Detectives worked endless hours under immense pressure while attacks continued. Every new victim represented another reminder the predator remained free. Some officers became consumed by the investigation entirely. Marriages deteriorated. Mental health suffered. Careers revolve around one invisible offender who always seemed to disappear moments before capture. Several near misses haunted investigators for decades. Witnesses reported suspicious men near crime scenes shortly before attacks. Patrol officers responded to prowling calls in neighborhoods later connected to assaults. At least once, investigators may have unknowingly spoken directly with the offender during police activity without realizing who he truly was. Those moments became unbearable in hindsight after the arrest finally occurred, especially because Joseph DeAngelo's background now appeared so disturbingly relevant. Former police officer, military veteran, familiar with procedures, familiar with investigative thinking. The theory that the Golden State Killer possessed law enforcement knowledge suddenly transformed from speculation into terrifying reality. Some retired detectives admitted publicly that revelation felt like betrayal, because policing depends heavily on public trust. And according to prosecutors, one of the most prolific violent offenders in California history once carried a badge himself. The symbolism shook public confidence deeply after the arrest. Yet despite everything uncovered during the investigation, huge portions of DeAngelo's inner life remained hidden forever. Court proceedings established criminal responsibility, but not complete psychological understanding. The offender's silence preserved mystery even at the conclusion of the case. Why those victims? Why those neighborhoods? Why the escalation from burglary to rape to murder? Why stop? Questions survive because the only person capable of answering fully refused to explain himself publicly. Criminologists examining the case often focus on escalation patterns visible throughout the crimes. Early burglaries connected to the Visalia ransacker displayed stalking behavior and territorial control. Then sexual assaults emerged with increasing sophistication and psychological domination. Later, murder entered the pattern with shocking brutality. The progression suggested compulsions, evolving gradually over years. But another detail disturbed experts profoundly. The offender adapted. Most violent criminals become increasingly reckless over time. The Golden State Killer often became more careful instead. He adjusted tactics when police pressure intensified. He shifted geographic areas strategically. He learned from investigations unfolding around him. That ability to evolve helped him survive decades without identification, until technology surpassed him. The genealogy breakthrough transformed not only the case itself, but the entire philosophy surrounding cold case investigations. Before forensic genealogy, many unsolved murders gradually faded into permanent uncertainty as evidence aged and witnesses disappeared. After DeAngelo's arrest, investigators nationwide realized dormant cases could suddenly become solvable again through advances unimaginable during original investigations. Families waiting decades for answers suddenly regained hope, and across America, old evidence rooms became treasure vaults of forgotten possibilities. Detectives reopened murder files untouched for years. Biological evidence once considered meaningless gained new value overnight. The Golden State Killer investigation proved that time no longer guaranteed protection for offenders who escaped justice during earlier forensic eras. That shift terrified many violent criminals retrospectively. Cases once considered hopeless began collapsing rapidly under genetic analysis. Unknown killers identified through distant relatives. Victims identified after generations without names. Cold cases resurrected from silence. Yet alongside scientific triumph emerged ethical uncertainty. Critics warn about privacy concerns surrounding genealogy databases. Could law enforcement access become too expansive? Should relatives unknowingly expose family members to criminal investigations simply by participating in ancestry research? The debate intensified legally and politically. But for survivors sitting inside courtrooms listening to decades of pain finally acknowledged publicly, the moral equation felt different. Without forensic genealogy, Joseph DeAngelo likely would have died unidentified. That reality remained impossible to ignore. And perhaps that is why the Golden State Killer case continues haunting public imagination even years after sentencing. It represents more than a serial predator finally captured. It represents a collision between old evil and new technology, between hidden violence and scientific persistence, between time protecting a killer and time ultimately betraying him. Still, closure remains imperfect. Some survivors openly admitted the arrest brought relief but not peace. Trauma embedded across 40 years cannot disappear simply because a courtroom finally delivers answers. The memories remain. The fear remains in quieter forms. Flashlight beams, footsteps outside windows, telephone calls late at night. Certain sounds still reopen old wounds instantly. And across California, older residents who lived through the terror still remember what those years felt like before the arrest happened. Years when newspapers printed fresh headlines about another attack, another murdered couple, another community descending into panic, while the predator responsible quietly blended back into daylight among ordinary people. For decades, the Golden State Killer existed as an invisible nightmare haunting suburban America. Then suddenly he became visible, an old man standing beneath bright courtroom lights. Fragile, silent, human, and somehow that reality felt even more frightening than the myth ever did. Even after the sentencing, the houses remained. That was one of the strangest things investigators and survivors spoke about afterward. The homes where the attacks happened still stood quietly across California's suburbs, as if nothing extraordinary had ever occurred there. Children rode bicycles past driveways once flooded with police lights. Families moved into bedrooms where terrified victims once lay frozen beneath flashlight beams. Neighborhoods rebuilt themselves slowly over decades, but beneath the ordinary rhythm of suburban life lingered invisible history. The knowledge that one man had transformed entire communities into landscapes of fear while remaining hidden among them the whole time. For survivors, certain places never fully returned to normal. A hallway, a sliding glass door, the sound of footsteps crossing a backyard at night. Memory attached itself to ordinary objects permanently. Some victims eventually moved away searching for emotional distance from crimes. Others stayed, refusing to surrender homes they loved because of one violent intruder. Yet even those who remained admitted the attacks changed how they experienced safety forever. One survivor later explained that before the assault, home meant protection. Afterward, home became something fragile, temporary, vulnerable to sudden darkness. That psychological damage spread far, beyond direct victims. The Golden State Killer altered an entire generation's understanding of suburban security. During the late 1970s, California neighborhoods once marketed as peaceful middle-class havens suddenly felt exposed. Residents installed floodlights, alarm systems, reinforced locks. Parents warned children obsessively about strangers. Women learned routines designed around fear, checking back seats before entering cars, avoiding open windows at night, sleeping lightly enough to wake at unfamiliar sounds. And somewhere during those years, Joseph D'Angelo allegedly continued living ordinary life beneath the same California sky. That contrast never stopped haunting investigators. Former detectives often described feeling anger not only toward the crimes themselves, but toward the sheer normality surrounding the offender afterward. While victims endured panic attacks, therapy, broken marriages, insomnia, and decades of fear, the man responsible appeared able to compartmentalize violence completely. He attended family events, worked jobs, paid taxes, grew older quietly. The imbalance felt unbearable, especially because some victims died before learning the truth. Several survivors passed away during the long decades between the attacks and the arrest. Some elderly detectives who dedicated careers to the case also died believing the Golden State Killer will remain unidentified forever. When forensic genealogy finally exposed D'Angelo, the breakthrough arrived almost too late for many people who spent lifetimes chasing answers. That reality cast a shadow over the victory itself. Justice delayed across 40 years becomes emotionally complicated. Yes, the killer was finally identified. Yes, survivors finally learned his name. But no investigation could restore lost decades. No conviction could erase the fear that shaped entire lives. And perhaps that is why the courtroom testimony during sentencing felt so emotionally devastating. Survivors no longer spoke simply about single nights of violence. They spoke about 40 years of aftermath, 40 years of checking locks obsessively, 40 years of nightmares, 40 years of struggling to trust darkness, silence, strangers, sometimes even loved ones. One victim described how trauma became woven into everyday existence until fear itself felt normal. Another survivor admitted she measured every house she ever lived in afterward according to escape routes and window visibility, because the attacks permanently altered how she interpreted physical space. The Golden State Killer stole more than safety. He stole certainty. And certainty is difficult to reclaim once shattered. As prosecutors reconstructed the crimes publicly, the scale of predation became even more horrifying. Investigators described neighborhoods stalked systematically, victims selected carefully, escape routes mapped in advance, homes entered quietly before attacks to unlock windows or study interiors. The level of preparation suggested someone who viewed violence almost operationally, calculated, disciplined, methodical. That discipline connected directly to another deeply unsettling aspect of the case, the offender's ability to evolve continuously. He shifted from burglaries to sexual assaults, from sexual assaults to murder. He adapted geographically and behaviorally when investigative pressure increased. Some criminologists believe the Golden State Killer represented one of the clearest examples of organized predatory escalation in modern American criminal history. Yet despite all the planning and control, glimpses of instability still surfaced repeatedly during attacks. Victims heard sudden emotional outbursts, whispering, heavy breathing, rage erupting unpredictably beneath calm behavior. The contradictions fascinated psychologists because they suggested enormous internal conflict existing beneath outward control. Some experts theorized D'Angelo experienced deep resentment and anger he redirected into ritualized violence. Others believe the crimes revolved fundamentally around domination and humiliation rather than impulsive rage. But because the offender remained largely silent publicly, complete understanding remained impossible, and silence itself became one final act of control. Many survivors wanted answers beyond conviction. They wanted to know why specific victims were chosen. They wanted explanations for bizarre behaviors during attacks. They wanted acknowledgement of emotional devastation stretching across decades. Instead, they often faced a motionless elderly man, saying little while prosecutors spoke on behalf of the dead and traumatized. The silence frustrated investigators, too. Retired detectives admitted they hoped the arrest might finally reveal hidden details buried for decades inside the killer's memory. Additional crimes, unidentified victims, psychological motives. Instead, many questions survived unanswered even after sentencing concluded. How many attacks were never connected? Were there additional murders? Did he ever come close to confessing privately? Did anyone in his personal life ever suspect the truth? The uncertainty surrounding those questions ensured the Golden State Killer case retained an aura of unresolved darkness despite the conviction itself. Meanwhile, the impact of forensic genealogy continued spreading across criminal investigations worldwide. After D'Angelo's arrest, law enforcement agencies began revisiting cold cases with renewed urgency. Evidence once considered useless suddenly carried extraordinary potential. Detectives reopened murder investigations abandoned for decades. Families who lost hope entirely suddenly received phone calls announcing breakthroughs once believed impossible. The Golden State Killer investigation transformed science into something almost cinematic. A ghost hidden for 40 years, exposed through distant relatives and microscopic genetic traces. But alongside admiration came fear, because the case also forced society to confront how much personal information modern technology quietly contains. Millions of people uploaded DNA profiles for harmless reasons: ancestry curiosity, health research, family connections. Without imagining investigators might someday trace violent offenders through genetic relationships stretching across generations. The ethical debate intensified immediately. Privacy advocates warned about surveillance expansion. Others argued solving murders justified the methods completely. And somewhere inside those debates lingered one undeniable fact. Without forensic genealogy, Joseph D'Angelo likely would have died unidentified. That possibility haunted survivors profoundly. Imagine reaching old age believing the man who destroyed your life escaped justice permanently. Imagine spending decades watching investigators fail repeatedly while the offender walks free somewhere nearby. Then suddenly, almost impossibly, technology changes the rules and exposes him after all. The emotional whiplash felt overwhelming for many victims. Relief mixed with rage. closure mixed with exhaustion. Some survivors admitted the arrest reopened trauma intensely because buried memories surged back into public attention overnight. Others embraced the opportunity to finally speak openly after years of silence. The courtroom became not only a legal proceeding, but a collective reckoning with decades of hidden pain. And through all of it, one image continued haunting public imagination more than any other. The idea that while California feared an invisible predator stalking suburban homes at night, the man responsible often woke the next morning and blended back into ordinary daylight unnoticed. He stood in grocery stores, walked through neighborhoods, spoke casually with neighbors, raised a family, a normal life existing directly beside unimaginable violence. That duality disturbed society because it shattered comforting myths about evil appearing recognizable from a distance. The Golden State Killer did not hide inside shadows permanently. He hid inside routine, inside familiarity, inside the ordinary rhythms of suburban America. And perhaps that is why the story continues haunting people long after the case itself officially ended. Because somewhere beneath the headlines, beyond the DNA evidence and courtroom testimony, the Golden State Killer case revealed something deeply frightening about human nature itself. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones standing far outside society. Sometimes they are already living quietly next door. In the end, the Golden State Killer case did not conclude with triumph. There was no cinematic release, no feeling that decades of horror had finally been washed clean by justice. Instead, there remained something quieter, heavier, a lingering sense that entire lives had been permanently altered long before Joseph DeAngelo ever entered a courtroom in handcuffs. The conviction answered the question of identity, but identity alone could never repair the damage left behind. Survivors still carried memories that surfaced unexpectedly in the middle of ordinary nights. Families still carried grief for people who never came home. And California still carried the ghosts of years when fear moved silently through suburban streets after midnight. The story always returns to the same image: a neighborhood asleep beneath warm summer air, sprinklers ticking softly across lawns, bedroom windows cracked open against the heat, a dog barking somewhere in the darkness. Then suddenly, without warning, a flashlight beam cuts through the room, and everything changes forever. That was the terror people remembered most. Not simply violence, uncertainty, the realization that safety itself could disappear in seconds. The Golden State Killer did not attack isolated wilderness cabins or deserted highways. He invaded homes, bedrooms, domestic spaces people trusted instinctively. The crimes transformed ordinary suburban life into something psychologically fragile, and that fragility never completely disappeared. Even decades later, survivors describe moments where memories return with brutal clarity: a creaking gate, the sound of dishes rattling, heavy breathing through a telephone line, darkness pressing against bedroom windows. Trauma remained hidden beneath ordinary routines, waiting for small triggers to reopen old fear instantly. Some survivors eventually found ways to rebuild emotionally. Others admitted the fear never truly left. And perhaps that is why the victim impact statements during sentencing became one of the most powerful moments in the entire case. Elderly men and women stood inside a courtroom confronting the man accused of stealing decades of peace from them. Some spoke through tears. Others through controlled fury sharpened across 40 years. They described panic attacks, broken relationships, sleepless nights, emotional isolation, marriages destroyed by trauma, children raised inside homes permanently shaped by fear. One survivor described spending years unable to walk through her own house comfortably at night because the attack rewired her understanding of darkness forever. Another admitted she still checked windows obsessively before sleeping, even in old age. The courtroom listened quietly while decades of buried pain finally surfaced publicly. And through much of it, Joseph DeAngelo remained silent, still seated, still listening. A frail old man whose appearance no longer matched the terrifying phantom who once sprinted through California neighborhoods, escaping police in the darkness. But survivors saw both versions simultaneously: the elderly defendant in court, and the masked intruder standing beside beds decades earlier, whispering threats into the night. Time changed his body. It did not erase memory. That contrast became central to the public obsession surrounding the case. America wanted to understand how someone capable of extraordinary violence could also maintain ordinary life for so long. The answer frightened people because it challenged comforting assumptions. Society prefers believing evil announces itself clearly through obvious signs. The Golden State Killer case suggested something far more disturbing, that predators sometimes hide successfully inside routine, familiarity, and normal social existence. Neighbors remembered lawn work, arguments over small inconveniences, an unpleasant personality. Nothing more. Former co-workers recalled anger issues and strained behavior at times, but not serial murder. Even relatives reportedly struggled afterward with the impossible task of reconciling personal memories against the horrifying crimes revealed publicly. That psychological contradiction may be one reason the case continues haunting public imagination years later, because it forces people to ask uncomfortable questions. How well do we truly know anyone around us? What hidden lives can exist beneath ordinary appearances? How close can evil stand before society notices? The Golden State Killer investigation also permanently changed criminal justice itself. Before forensic genealogy exposed D'Angelo, countless cold cases across America sat quietly deteriorating inside evidence rooms with little hope of resolution. The arrest proved technology could resurrect forgotten investigations decades later through methods unimaginable during the original crimes. Suddenly, time stopped protecting offenders. That shift created shockwaves through law enforcement. Detectives reopened unsolved murders nationwide. Biological evidence, once dismissed as useless, gained extraordinary importance. Families waiting generations for answers suddenly found hope returning unexpectedly. The Golden State Killer case became a turning point, not just historically, scientifically, culturally, emotionally. Yet even as the investigation entered textbooks and documentaries, the deepest impact remained intensely personal for survivors. Some admitted they felt relief simply knowing the predator no longer existed anonymously in the world. Others said the arrest gave them permission to finally speak openly about experiences hidden for decades beneath shame and fear. But many survivors also acknowledged something painful. Closure is not the same as healing. Justice arrived too late to restore lost years. Too late for victims who died before the arrest. Too late to erase trauma woven permanently into memory. And maybe that is why the final emotional way of the case feels so haunting. Because after 40 years of headlines, investigations, sketches, DNA breakthroughs, and courtroom testimony, what remains most unforgettable is not the killer himself. It is the fear he left behind. A fear so powerful entire communities changed how they lived. Parents locking windows obsessively before bed. Women sleeping beside telephones and weapons. Men patrolling suburban streets at night. Searching for shadows, moving between houses. Children growing up overhearing terrified conversations adults thought they could not understand. For years, California lived beside an invisible predator, and the predator lived beside them in return. That final truth still feels almost impossible to process. While newspapers printed headlines about a mysterious serial attacker terrorizing the state, Joseph D'Angelo allegedly woke each morning and stepped back into ordinary daylight unnoticed. He stood in grocery store lines, drove suburban roads, spoke casually with neighbors, raised children, attended family gatherings, a normal life existing directly beside unimaginable violence. The duality feels horrifying because it reveals how effectively some predators can compartmentalize evil. There was no secret underground lair, no dramatic hidden identity waiting to be discovered, just suburban home, routine habits, ordinary aging, and decades of silence protecting the truth, until science finally caught up. In many ways, the Golden State Killer believed time itself would save him. Witness memories faded, detectives retired, evidence aged, public attention shifted toward newer tragedies. The case slowly transformed from immediate danger into historical mystery. For decades, that strategy worked perfectly. Then forensic genealogy changed the rules forever. A distant relative uploads DNA. A database quietly connects fragments. Investigators begin building family trees. And suddenly the invisible man becomes visible again. The irony feels almost poetic. After surviving helicopters, task forces, manhunts, media coverage, and 40 years of police investigation, the Golden State Killer was ultimately exposed not through violence or confession, but through biology, through family connections stretching invisibly across generations. Through microscopic traces left behind decades earlier in crime scenes, he believed time had buried forever. And perhaps that is a final haunting lesson buried inside the story. The past never disappears completely. Not for survivors. Not for investigators. Not even for killers who spend decades hiding inside ordinary life. Somewhere, evidence remains waiting. Somewhere, memory survives. Somewhere, truth keeps moving quietly through time until a moment it finally steps back into the light. And across California, there are still people who remember those years vividly. The panic, the headlines, the sleepless nights, the terrified belief that a monster was slipping silently through suburban darkness, choosing victims at random while nobody knew his name. Now they know. A former police officer, a husband, a father, a neighbor, a man who raised a family while police hunted him for decades. And for 40 years, he almost got away with it.